Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei secretly mastered Ice and Dragon. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Ria sighed as she and her peerage returned through a magical circle to the clubhouse. She sat on the couch and thought about what had just happened. The past 2 weeks had been exhausting. She had taken a trip home to the underworld to convince her family not to marry her to Riser Phoenix. Just thinking of him still angered her, but her family had insisted it was for the good of the household and for the devil's legacy. She had persuaded her brother that she should not be forced into that engagement, but convincing her parents and grandparents had been far more difficult. After 2 long weeks of debates, arguments, and compromises, she had finally returned and could at last relax. Akino, Rias's queen and oldest, most trusted friend, offered to prepare a bath for President Rias. Rias accepted gratefully and explained that she was very tired. Discussing marriage with her family always drained her. Kiba Yuto, her knight, asked whether there was anything else they needed to do, but Rias told him that he and Kaneko could go home since it was late. Kiba smiled politely, nodded, and left through the door. Kaneko Taju, her rook, gave a quiet goodnight to President Rias in her usual emotionless tone and also departed. Akino announced that the bath was ready. Rias prepared for the shower, set her clothes aside on a nearby table, and stepped under the warm water. As the water washed over her, her crimson hair lay damp against her shoulders. Her thoughts turned back to how she could avoid marrying Riser Phoenix. Perhaps she could challenge him to a rating game. If she won, her parents might finally recognize her maturity and allow her to make her own choices. First, though, she would need to strengthen her peerage. She cared for them deeply and would not trade them for anything, but if she pursued the challenge, she had to assemble a team capable of competing. Smiling at the idea of potential candidates, one in particular stood out, someone she had been observing for quite a while. Hyoudou Issei yawned wildly as he stumbled sleepily toward the school, nearly colliding with a trash can. He glared at the metal bin as if it had personally offended him. Today simply was not his day. His business the previous night had run late, not finishing until 3 in the morning. When he finally got home, he discovered he had left his keys in his room and had locked himself out. After a failed attempt to sneak back inside, his parents intercepted him and demanded an explanation. Unable to satisfy their questions, he spent the night without dinner and cleaning the house from top to bottom. By the time he collapsed into bed, exhausted, the alarm was already blaring. He considered skipping school, but his father ripped the sheets off him and dragged him upright. When Issei moved too slowly, his father threw him into an ice-cold bath. By the time he emerged, he was nearly late. He dressed as fast as he could, skipped breakfast, and sprinted out the door. He was now walking to Kuo Academy with his 2 friends. Issei greeted Matsuda and Motohama with a tired wave. Matsuda and Motohama turned and grinned back at him. Matsuda cheerfully declared it a fine morning, and Motohama added that it was glorious because they were enrolled at Kuo Academy. Matsuda and Motohama were Issei's mischievous companions, the sort who never missed an opportunity to joke loudly. Matsuda had been a jock in middle school and joined the photography club in high school. He liked to act boastful. Motohama was short and wore glasses, and he had a habit of making exaggerated observations about people that both amused and annoyed those around him. Issei listened as they rambled on about the school uniforms. The girls' uniform consisted of a white long-sleeved button-down shirt with subtle vertical pinstripes, a black ribbon at the collar, a black shoulder cape with a buttoned corset, and a magenta skirt with white accents. Issei admired the design and felt grateful for whoever had created it. The boys' uniform was a black blazer with white trim worn over a white long-sleeved button-down shirt, a black ribbon at the collar, black pants, and brown dress shoes. There was also a summer version with short sleeves and without the blazer or cape. Issei was curious about how the change simplified the look. Issei spoke passionately about appreciating what Kuo Academy represented. Matsuda and Motohama pretended to weep with exaggerated emotion at the sentiment, and together they declared they wanted to be popular. They imagined what it would be like to have many friends and admirers at the school. Many of the male students had similar hopes after Ko transitioned from an all-girls school to a co-ed one. A few girls at the gate called out to scold them for their loud behavior, and the three friends felt their enthusiasm deflate. Matsuda muttered that they were unlucky and out of favor, and Motohama agreed that they probably had little chance of changing their reputations. Issei would not let them sink into despair. He rallied his friends, urging them not to give up and to make the most of the chance before them. The three of them cheered for one another, but the girls at the gate continued whispering and scolding, and the friends shuffled forward, embarrassed and unsettled. Rias moved her pawn and declared checkmate. Akino observed that it had been a difficult problem, and Rias told her to make the next one harder. Rias then excused herself to take a shower and used the time to think about her future. She needed a plan to avoid her arranged marriage and perhaps challenge Riser for her freedom. To stand a chance, she would need more allies. A new school year could mean new transfers to Kuo Academy who might help her cause. Hyoudou Issei sneezed nearby. Matsuda bounded up to him, unusually excited, and Motohama followed with a proud look. Motohama said he had found a peephole in the kendo club, and the three boys hurried toward it, buzzing with anticipation. Issei peered through the hole and told himself he had discovered something extraordinary. Matsuda and Motohama began arguing over whose turn it was, and their bickering quickly escalated into a crude prank. Both of them jabbed at Issei's eyes at once, causing him to stumble and cry out in pain while he tried to recover. When he looked up, Issei was met by a squad of club members glaring down at him. The girls reprimanded him fiercely for spying and made their displeasure clear. They surrounded him with their shurnai, delivering a swift, disciplined scolding in the style of kendo practice that left him sore and humiliated. Later, Issei sat alone on a bridge at sunset, leaning against the railing and nursing his pride. He reflected on the misfortune of being caught and punished for the prank, but he tried to find something to be grateful for in the experience. Draig, the voice in his head, scolded him for his recklessness and reminded him that he should have been better prepared. Draig then warned that someone was approaching from the right. Issei looked up as a shy girl with violet eyes and long black hair came toward him in a uniform he did not recognize. She confirmed that he was Hyoudou Issei and, after a brief, nervous exchange about whether he had a girlfriend, she asked him to go out with her. Issei, taken aback and elated, said he did not and accepted her request. The girl introduced herself as a Mano Yuma, exchanged numbers with him, and walked away. Once she was out of earshot, Issei erupted into a joyful whoop, celebrating that he had a girlfriend. Draig reminded him to remember what Yuma might be, but Issei waved the concern aside, focused on his happiness that she had asked him out. As Issei made his way home, laughing, the short white-haired devil who had been watching him since he left school continued to observe his conversation with the fallen angel. Draig warned Issei that there was a big chance she would go on the date to kill him. Issei insisted that Draig be quiet. This was his first date, and he intended to impress her so much that she could not harm him. Draig pointed out that Issei sounded like he was certain she would try to kill him. Issei fell silent and told Draig to shut up. Draig smugly replied that he had been right. The morning after his meeting with Yuma, she and Issei walked to school together, surprising Matsuda and Motohama, who still refused to accept that the two were a couple. Draig was conspicuously absent the whole day. When the pair were alone, Yuma had asked Issei on a date for that Saturday, which happened to be today. Issei finished dressing and examined himself in the mirror. He wore a black polo shirt under a gray jacket, black pants, and new dress shoes he had bought for a special occasion. After shouting to his parents that he was leaving, he set out for the date an hour early and relaxed at the meeting point, taking in his surroundings. Issei asked Draig for a status. Draig reported no traps and no ambushes, and then warned that an unfamiliar energy signature was approaching. At that moment, a young woman in a devil cosplay handed him a decorative summoning circle. Issei examined it and pocketed it. From what he knew of devils, such circles could be used to summon them or form contracts, so it might be useful. Yuma ran up wearing a pink top, a skirt, and a small bag. She asked if he had waited long. Issei smiled and said that he had just arrived, though inside he was thrilled. Their date began. Window shopping at the mall, a meal at a family restaurant, and Issei buying her a small bracelet. As dusk fell, Yuma asked to return to the park to show him something. Issei agreed, trying to conceal his grin and hoping for a perfect ending to the evening. They walked to the park and stopped in front of a fountain. Yuma asked if he would die for her. At that instant she transformed. Her clothing shifted into dark, imposing armor. A spiked pauldron appeared on her right shoulder, long black gloves covered her arms, and black wings unfurled from her back. The change gave her the appearance of a fallen angel. A spear of light formed around her hand as she raised it to strike, but when she looked away for the briefest moment, Issei was gone. Rainier, the form Yuma had taken, shrieked in disbelief and began scanning the area, furious that he had vanished so quickly. Issei, thinking it was terrible luck that his first date had already tried to kill him, watched as Rainier turned and launched the spear toward the sound of his voice. He dodged it with ease, the spear striking harmlessly into the ground behind him. Rainier demanded to know what he was. Issei claimed to be a normal human, but Rainier snarled that a normal human could not have evaded her attack or disappeared so suddenly. Issei teased that he had answered honestly and asked what she thought she was doing, pointing out that he had done nothing to deserve being killed. Rainier regained her composure and, blaming the god who had placed the sacred gear inside him, rushed at Issei intent on killing him. He sidestepped, grabbed her arm, and used his strength to force her down onto the pavement. Rainier struggled, but Issei held her with a grip far stronger than a human's. Issei told Drake that he could not let her go because she would report him to her superiors, and he did not want to kill her since that would draw too much suspicion. Drake suggested erasing her memory, but Issei worried that she might be questioned later. Drake then proposed altering her memories instead. It would be simpler, safer, and less risky. Issei agreed that altering her memories could work. While they spoke, Rainier continued to struggle and shouted in frustration. Issei apologized to Yuma and explained that, because she had tried to kill him, he had to do something to prevent further danger. He said it was nothing personal and that she would forget the incident. Rainier's vision went black, and when she regained consciousness hours later, her memories of that day had been heavily altered. Meanwhile, at the Occult Research Club, a tense atmosphere hung in the air. Aquino noted that he had not used the summoning circle as the clock chimed 9. Rias responded tersely that she knew. A member asked what they would do about it. Rias instructed Hyoudou to inform Sona about his death and to let her handle what needed to be done. Rias felt guilty. Her intuition had failed for the first time, and even as a devil she had to accept outcomes she did not like. She could not shake the regret at a life lost because of poor circumstances. Issei walked through the school gates, yawning. The previous night had been difficult. He had altered the memory of a sentient being, a task that left him uneasy, and he had taken extra time to ensure the change would not be traced back to him or harm the fallen's mind. At home his parents had seemed distraught, and when they saw him they had clung to him as if he had returned from the dead. After a while he opened the classroom door. The room fell silent and everyone froze with shocked expressions. The homeroom teacher stared at him in disbelief and struggled to form words. Issei, puzzled, asked why he should not be there. The teacher explained that they had received news that Issei had died in a car accident the previous day and moved to inform the student council. Issei sighed, too tired to sort through the confusion, and went to his seat. There he found a vase like those used for memorials. Before the teacher could leave, the classroom door swung open and Ria strode in, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Issei. She rushed to him, grabbed his arm with urgency, and, masking any warmth with concern, told him to come with her. She then led him out of the classroom. Issei demanded to know what was going on. Rias had told Aquino that there was something special about him. Issei sat inside the old school building that doubled as the clubroom for the Occult Research Club, relaxed on an expensive-looking sofa while Rias Gremory held his right hand with eager affection. Across from him, Hyoudou Aquino, a third-year student with a dignified presence, long black hair tied with an orange ribbon, and violet eyes, watched with quiet interest. In a corner, Tuju Kaneko, a first-year girl with short white hair clipped by a cat-shaped hairpin, munched on sweets and stared at him intently. Leaning against the wall behind them stood the blonde Kiba Hyoudou. Issei tried a casual question, aiming to probe their intentions without revealing too much. He asked why he had been brought here. Rias confirmed his name as Hyoudou Issei, and he answered yes. When Rias pressed him on what he was, he admitted uncertainty. Rias clarified, asking how he had managed to survive the encounter with a fallen angel the previous night. Issei repeated the name, sounding puzzled, and Rias sighed in irritation at his nonchalant reaction. Akino smiled and teased their president for being ignored. Kaneko offered that she could force an answer from him. Issei, surprised at the threat from someone so small, protested that she was just a little girl. Kaneko then showed how serious she was by gripping a nearby metal statue and bending it easily as she glared at him, the sudden display of strength catching him off guard. Akino asked what the student council thought of him. Rias mentioned that Sona had taken an interest as well, but she had been persuaded otherwise. Akino asked if Rias intended to make him one of them. Rias grinned and confirmed that she did. Issei asked what they were talking about. Rias and Akino exchanged looks before Rias asked if he would become a devil if given the chance. Issei tried not to show how nervous he felt. Rias explained that everyone present was a devil. With a nod from the group, they all stood and unfurled leathery black wings from their backs to demonstrate their nature. Issei reacted calmly, studying the wings with curiosity rather than fear. Kiba asked whether Issei had seen devils before. When Issei asked whether succubi were devils, Rias said no. He continued asking about demons, vampires, and yokai, and Rias denied each as well, explaining that those beings were often mistaken for devils but were not the same. Issei said he had met some such beings before and admitted that his earlier cluelessness had been an attempt to tease them. Just then his phone rang. He said he had to go, gathered his things, and left the room, leaving the devils to discuss him. Once Issei was gone, Rias asked for their impressions. Kiba suggested that Issei was hiding something, which was unsurprising given how little they knew of him. Akino found Issei intriguing. The cat-like Kaneko hesitated, then addressed Rias. She believed he knew techniques that used natural energy. She explained that when she had sensed him, she had found a great deal of natural energy within him, despite his human form, which was unusual for a normal human. Silence fell as each of them considered the strange human. Then Rias realized she had forgotten to ask him for his answer. Drake wondered how Issei had managed to get out of that last situation. Issei answered Drake that bullshitting his way out of trouble was an essential skill, especially with the supernatural involved. Issei was not in the mood to go back to class and had slipped into a convenience store during school hours. It had been easy to bypass the guards, who would expect a student to jump a 3-meter wall around the school. Drake warned that the attackers were devils and that fallen angels had been drawn in as well, and that Issei could not hide forever. Issei sighed and decided he would cross that bridge when he reached it. After buying his manga, Issei walked home and suddenly dodged a spear of light from a man hovering above him. The man wore a gray trench coat and a matching fedora, black feathered wings. Unfurling as he looked down with a sneer. Issei recognized the name Rainier and realized the man claimed her to have killed him, which made Issei curse inwardly and admit he had not thought things through. The man said he would finish the job himself and launched another spear. Issei rolled aside to avoid it. Issei pleaded aloud for reasons why they wanted to kill him. The fallen lowered his spear and said it was because Issei carried a dangerous sacred gear that could harm them, then dismissed him as already doomed. Issei, thinking the explanation cliché, pretended ignorance and acted stupid so the enemy would not know he understood. The fallen renewed the assault with multiple spears of light, and one struck close enough to tear the fabric of Issei's shirt. The fallen's anger rose and he summoned a different spear, blue and far more lethal in appearance. He charged, and Issei did not see the final movement. When the killing intent reached him, Issei was suddenly somewhere else, as if pulled into a warped memory. The scene blurred into a battlefield bathed in tumult, clashing steel, distant cries, and a young boy standing in the middle of the chaos. The boy withdrew his dagger from an opponent just as a spear hurtled toward him. Back in the present, Donasek did not understand what had happened. One moment he had unleashed his best weapon, a blue spear of light that seemed unstoppable, and the next he found his face pressed against the pavement. He was a fallen angel who had survived the great war of the 3 factions. Yet here he was restrained by a human boy, unable to see how the boy had moved. The boy had pinned him with a knee to his back and held his arm in a way that left Danasik helpless. He swore under his breath. Issei's eyes went wide as he stared at his captive and realized he had reacted purely by reflex. He flinched when he sensed the telltale shift of a magic circle being formed. A voice called Issei's name, making him resist a groan. A group of devils had appeared and distracted him long enough for the fallen to break free and fly away. As the fallen retreated into the sky, he paused, stared into Issei's eyes, and introduced himself as Danasik, telling Issei to remember his name before disappearing. Issei sighed, turned to the devils behind him, and gave a hurried, evasive response before running off. Rias Gremory told Issei Hyoudou that she wanted him to join her peerage as she sat behind her large desk. Issei asked why. Rias explained that he had something special inside him, a sacred gear. She warned that fallen angels would keep attacking him and that, even if he could defend himself, a single lucky strike could be fatal. Issei knew that all too well. Rias offered protection if he joined her peerage. She said it would be much easier for her to protect him and much more convenient. Issei felt his heart race at her charming smile. When he asked about a catch, Rias revealed that to be part of her peerage he would have to be resurrected as a devil. She took out a ruby-red pawn from beneath the table and identified it as an evil piece. With that, he would become part of her peerage and be under her protection as a member of the Gremory household. Rias added that if he worked hard and rose in rank, he might one day lead his own circle of devoted companions. Issei was shocked and tempted by the offer. He hesitated, saying he did not know anything about devils and that it was his life to consider. Rias acknowledged his concerns and proposed that he join their club to see what devils did before deciding. In return, they would protect him from fallen angels. Issei agreed. Rias introduced herself formally as Rias Gremory with a noble bow. Akino Himejima introduced herself with an elegant bow. Kaneko Tuju gave a terse introduction before returning to her suites. Kiba Yuto greeted Issei with a prince-like smile. Issei introduced himself and felt certain that life would become much more lively from that point on. Issei pedaled furiously, determined to reach his first summon. It was his first week as a temporary devil and so far he was enjoying it. The club members were kind and willing to help him understand what it meant to be a devil. He still remembered the lecture from the day after he joined the club. In the memory, Rias sat in front of her desk, sipping Akino's tea, and reminded Issei that, as a club member, it was her responsibility to help him adapt. Issei blurted out whether he could really have a large circle of admirers someday. Rias chuckled and explained that he might, but he would probably need to be promoted to a high-class devil first. Rias began to explain the devils' hierarchy and their abilities. She said that devils generally looked much like normal humans except for their wings, which she and the others had shown him before. All devils possessed superhuman strength and endurance as well as enhanced senses, such as keen eyesight and hearing. Devils were nocturnal and could see clearly in the dark. All devils had an ability called language, which allowed them to understand any language they heard, including speech in videos and music. Rias warned that devils shared a common weakness. Anything associated with the biblical god could harm them, and if the power was strong enough or exposure was prolonged, it could be fatal. Light was especially dangerous because it represented that divine power. Issei recalled the spears he had seen and understood how serious the threat could be. She then described the devil hierarchy. The highest ranks included the ultimate class devils such as the four Satans, great kings, archdukes, dukes, princes and princesses, and the heirs of devil clans. High-class devils included marquises, margraves and margravines, viscounts and viscountesses, and barons and baronesses. The mid-class consisted of baronets and dames. The lowest ranks were the low-class devils, which would be Issei's starting point if he chose to be reincarnated. Issei felt discouraged at the idea of being a low-class devil, worrying that it would not impress others. Rias pointed out that Kiba Yuto was a low-class devil as well. Yuto admitted he was low-class and smiled in a way that drew admiring glances. Kaneko bluntly told Issei that women would not like a pervert like him. Aquino reassured him that low-class devils could be promoted if they worked hard, and that promotion could lead to receiving evil pieces and forming a peerage. As the peerage's master, he could ask his subordinates to help with many things. Issei wanted to know how to get promoted. Rias explained that there were 3 main ways for a devil to increase rank in modern times. Contracts, which involved fulfilling wishes for clients and was the slowest, traditional method. Military accomplishments, which were outstanding acts during crises and the fastest but rare path. And the rating games, which were the most popular method to ascend the hierarchy. The rating game allows devils to test and show off their skills and abilities against each other in a controlled environment. Performing well raises reputation and leads to promotion, and most devils consider it the best way to improve their ranking. Rias explained whether he was ready to act as a devil. Issei hesitated and asked what kinds of requests they received. Rias described that, as a high-class devil, she rarely received casual summons. Her work usually involved removing curses or defeating monsters that threatened summoners. She added that Aquino's clients tended to be executives or affluent individuals, and that she handled a variety of tasks aimed at easing the stresses of high society. Rias noted that Kaneko did simpler jobs, from helping a client with a game to posing for a photo shoot. Rias said that Hyoudou's requests often came from older women who wanted help reducing stress through conversation and companionship. Rias noticed Issei trembling and asked if he was all right. Issei erupted in frustration at the fairness of it all, insisting it seemed impossible that someone could be so popular, so attractive, so kind, and so competent, and that it made him uncomfortable. Everyone stared at him, and Issei felt awkward. Rias told him that now that he was a temporary devil, he could start by distributing summoning circles to people who might want to call them. Issei looked at the stack of papers and thought that the path to becoming a high-class devil was long. He rode his bike to a client who had requested Kaneko, who was unfortunately busy. Rias thought this would be a perfect opportunity to introduce him to the world of devils. He stood before the apartment door feeling oddly nervous and knocked. A few seconds later, a man with long hair and glasses opened the door. His unshaven face and untidy hair gave him the look of a devoted fan of anime and related hobbies. Before the man could speak, he slammed the door in Issei's face. Issei called out, demanding to know what that was for. The man shouted for him to go away and said he did not want to buy anything. Issei insisted that he was not a salesman but the one the man had summoned. The man poked his head out and questioned whether he was really a devil. Issei explained that he was more of a temporary helper but would do his best to fulfill the request. The man slammed the door again, muffling his words and insisting he had wanted Kaneko and not Issei. Issei knocked repeatedly and refused to leave. After a moment, the man relented and opened the door. Issei entered a room filled with anime merchandise and commented that it was a nice place. The man asked what Issei could do. Issei responded that it depended on the summoner's wish. The man expressed doubt and produced a familiar-looking uniform from his collection. He then described an unusual cosplay idea inspired by a character from a show. Issei hesitated and thought about his past experiences with dressing in certain ways, and he felt a strong reluctance to repeat them. He responded that he did not want to take on that role. The man persisted, and they continued to exchange questions about what Issei could offer. Issei offered a surprising ability. He could make his left hand seem to speak. The man joked about ventriloquism, and Issei called on Drake to wake up. Drake questioned the reason for being roused and suggested that Issei should show something meaningful to the human. Issei admitted uncertainty about what to demonstrate and then diverted the conversation by noticing the client's impressive collection. The client admired Issei's appreciation for Dragon Ball. He recalled attempting a Kamehameha when he was younger, and Issei replied that he had aimed for similar feats. Drake sighed at the exchange, finding amusement in the trivial argument. The scene ended with the two of them trading excited, youthful boasts about their favorite series. Issei greeted Matsuda and Motohama as he entered the classroom. They asked what had happened yesterday, since Rias Gremory had dragged him away and he had not returned. Issei shrugged and explained that Rias, as president of the Occult Research Club, had been curious. When she heard the rumor that he had died but still appeared at school, she assumed something supernatural was involved. His friends admitted they had been surprised and that the teacher had nearly had a heart attack when Issei walked through the door. Issei said he was alive and just wanted to relax and forget his troubles for a while. Matsuda suggested the perfect way to unwind, and Motohama produced something from his pocket with a flourish. They joked about spending after school together and watching a silly special, insisting it would cheer him up. Issei, moved, thanked them with watery eyes, and the two declared their loyalty as friends. Their celebration was abruptly interrupted when Rias called his name across the room. The other girls muttered angrily about Rias and Issei behind their backs, but Matsuda and Motohama, having been riled up a moment earlier, shouted when they saw Rias looking for him. Issei acknowledged Rias as his senior. Rias told him to come with her, and when he protested about classes she warned she would drag him again. Resigned, he followed her out of the classroom, and the students around them shouted insults and accusations as they passed. Issei felt the sting of their glares and threats, though he also noticed a few envious looks. The next morning, a misunderstanding occurred at Issei's house. Rias had stayed overnight after visiting, and his parents discovered them, causing a chaotic scene that was quickly resolved. After clearing up the confusion, Issei and Rias went to school together. The reactions from other students were overwhelmingly negative. Many of the boys attacked him with jealousy while the girls hurled accusations and insults. Issei tried to ignore it, though he could have done without the more hostile threats. At breakfast earlier that day, his parents had seemed off, moving and speaking in an unusually listless way that made Issei worry for them. Rias reassured him that it was temporary and would pass. Then she left for her own classes, promising to send someone to check on him later. As soon as she was gone, a sudden blow to the back of Issei's head nearly sent him stumbling into the marble pillars of Kuo Academy's grand entrance. Matsuda and Motohama stood over him with twin glares of accusation, demanding to know why he had been walking with Rias Gremory. The courtyard fell silent and then began to press for an explanation as the three of them argued heatedly. Nearby, two high-class devils spoke quietly to one another, observing the commotion. Rias greeted Sona. Sona returned the greeting, noted that this was the first time she had seen him up close, and asked if he was the one. Sona was Rias's childhood friend. She was a woman around Rias's age, with short, no-nonsense hair and sharp violet eyes behind red-rimmed glasses, the very image of a strict student council president. Sona was also a high-class devil, heir of the Citri clan, and the student council president of Kuo Academy, a position filled by her own peerage. Rias nodded at Sona and explained that the boy was indeed special. When she had first seen him, she had instantly known he was unique. Then she asked Sona if she had brought what Rias had requested. Sona inclined her head and produced a short folder. She reported that, from what she had seen, the boy truly did seem remarkable. He had no records at all from preschool or grade school, and a deeper search turned up no birth certificate. Rias turned to look at the folder in Sona's hands. Sure enough, it contained nothing more than a few loose sheets of paper, no more than 10. The only concrete information was an episode of erratic behavior a year ago when he had signed up for every club in the school, excelled, and then quit almost immediately afterward. Sona closed the folder sharply and added that there were no pictures, no friends who could connect him to a past, nothing under the name Hyoudou Issei except adoption papers from a year ago. She had even asked his parents, but they refused to say anything about him. Rias considered the report thoughtfully and wondered if she could get Issei to open up to them. She then stared at Issei, who was now playfully putting his two friends in a headlock. Issei sat alone at his table, drawing on a sketchpad. He wondered who she would send. He hoped it might be Akino, or maybe Kaneko. When the girls suddenly squealed, he realized his private wish had gone unheard. Kiba approached with a smile and greeted Issei. One of the girls complained about the situation, asking what was going on with him. Another girl warned Kiba to stay away from Issei, claiming Issei might lead him astray. Kiba ignored those warnings and told Issei that the club president, Rias, had sent him to fetch him and asked him to come along. Issei stood up and put his sketchpad back in his bag. As he walked with Kiba down the corridor, the other girls called after them, accusing Issei of corrupting Kiba. Issei sighed and wondered why the girls kept reacting like that. Kiba then asked Issei what he thought about being a temporary member of the Devils. Issei thought for a moment and noted that the Devils had been kind and helpful so far, very different from the few Devils he had encountered before. He admitted it had been a bit disappointing that he had not formed a contract the previous night. Kiba pointed out that this was not surprising, since Issei was not truly a devil yet. Issei laughed it off and asked Kiba what it was like to be summoned by so many women. Kiba replied that it was fine, which left Issei staring in surprise at what popularity seemed to mean. They arrived at the club room. Kaneko sat on the couch, eating sweets. Akino handed Rias her clothes, and Rias thanked her. Issei noticed the shower area and felt a rush of excitement at the facilities the club offered. He fidgeted with happiness, already looking forward to future visits. Someone nearby teased him about his expression, and Akino, who had a mature, composed presence, finally took notice of him and commented that he was their newest member. Akino asked how Issei's job the night before had been, and Issei replied that it had been all right, rubbing the back of his head and smiling shyly. Akino seemed pleased by his answer. Rias emerged from the shower, wearing the Kuo Academy uniform and drying her hair with a towel. She thanked everyone for waiting and explained that she had to shower since she had spent the night at Issei's house. Issei stammered that it had been no trouble. Rias then asked Issei what he had thought of being a temporary devil. Issei remembered spending time the previous night with a fellow fan of anime and games and said the experience had been different from what he expected but not unpleasant. He had imagined something more dramatic and tried to cover a small, awkward grin. Akino teased him about whether he had been thinking something inappropriate and reminded him that the club did not handle that sort of request. Those were for specialists and experienced devils. Someone muttered that he was being ridiculous. Rias brought the conversation back to the main point and asked to see Issei's sacred gear. Issei hesitated, then asked the voice inside him, "Drag," to make the display resemble the twice critical form. The voice agreed. Issei raised his left arm and the boosted gear appeared, taking on the appearance of a twice critical. Rias examined the sacred gear with interest, raising an elegant eyebrow. Issei shrugged awkwardly and dismissed the gauntlet, freeing his arm. Rias smiled and told him not to belittle it. Having any sacred gear was fortunate, and a dragon type was especially promising. With training, she said she expected Issei could become powerful enough to be promoted easily, and she expressed her hopes for his future success. Issei sighed as he trudged down the road. He had not been able to fulfill Miltan's wish. In the end, a strange man had made him watch a show called Magical Girl Milky Spiral 7. It had been an unexpectedly pleasant watch, but not relaxing because Miltan kept copying the character, and the whole thing had left him exhausted. Between that and memories of similar days, he had skipped school and taken a bench in the park to stare at the sky. He thought that the day was peaceful, that he wanted to stay like this a while. The breeze was nice. He wondered if this calm was something he had missed in his childhood. A lot had happened in just 3 years. His life had changed more than he could have imagined, and he found himself grateful for a moment without trouble or danger. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden exclamation and the sight of a blonde girl who had tripped nearby. Issei moved to help her. He asked if she was all right, and the girl looked up with emerald green eyes sparkling in the sun. She accepted his hand and thanked him. A gust of wind blew off her headdress, revealing her face. She had long blonde hair that fell to her back, split bangs over her forehead and a single strand that stuck up. She wore a dark teal nun's habit with light blue accents, a brown satchel on her right hip, and brown boots with black straps. A silver cross hung around her neck and a white veil with blue trim had been displaced by the wind. Issei handed the headdress back. The girl smiled gratefully. He offered to help pick up the contents of her open suitcase, scattered across the pavement, and she at first protested that she could manage, then accepted his help. As he gathered her belongings, he found a small item and returned it. She grabbed it back, embarrassed, and apologized. She explained that she had recently been transferred to the town's church but did not know where it was, and that her Japanese was not perfect, with the occasional Italian word slipping in. Issei noted her speech and offered to guide her. He spoke in fluent Italian to make her comfortable, and she brightened, saying that she could not believe he spoke Italian and that she was grateful for his help. Issei kept to himself the fact that he was a potential devil and simply offered to accompany her to the church. They had taken only a few steps when they heard crying. They found a small boy, about 8 or 9, sitting on the pavement with a scraped knee. The blonde ran to him, placed her hand over the injury, and green light coalesced where she touched him. The scrape quickly faded and the boy, wide-eyed, thanked the older sister. Issei recognized the light as the effect of a sacred gear used for healing. When Issei asked about it, the girl explained that it was her healing power, given by God. Her smile had a bittersweet quality, the kind he knew well from people who had done everything they could only to be let down. A memory surged up in Issei then, one of a tense confrontation he had faced before. He remembered standing against enemies and monsters created by a power called Annihilation Maker, and against someone wielding an ability known as Dimension Lost, with a legion of soldiers at their command. His attention had been fixed not on the monsters or the soldiers but on a small, childlike figure at the center of it all, a girl named Ophis. She had long black hair and gray eyes, and though she appeared calm, Issei had seen surprise cross her face. Issei had shouted to Ophis that she was being used and that she needed to be careful. At the same moment an enemy's strike had nearly reached him, but he had intercepted it just in time. An antagonist had taunted him that even with all his power it would be impossible to defeat 3 high-tier opponents alone. Issei's expression had hardened into a determined glare. He had vowed to protect Ophis and to push back those who threatened her. The intensity of that moment lingered in his memory like a flash of lightning. Back in the present, the church appeared on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown trees and shrubbery. The girl's smile at the sight of the building was bright and innocent. She expressed relief that they had arrived and thanked Issei before she prepared to leave. Issei called after her as she turned to go. Asia mentioned that she had not yet thanked him for his help. Issei apologized, explaining he could not stay because he had an appointment and because the Occult Research Club would be angry if they discovered he had entered a church, the headquarters of their natural enemy. Asia tried to protest but fell silent. Issei reassured her that they would see each other again and introduced himself as Issei Hyoudou. Asia corrected herself about manners and introduced herself as Asia Argento, asking him to call her Asia. Issei said goodbye, and Asia replied by calling him Issei. He waved at the sister and left the church, thinking. She was a kind girl. When he returned to the clubroom, he learned that a stray devil had been found nearby. Strays, devils who had abandoned their masters, were to be destroyed when encountered. The devil had been reported in a warehouse on the outskirts of town. When they arrived, the air at the entrance was thick with the metallic tang of old blood and decay, which made the place feel even more oppressive. Rias told Issei that this was a good opportunity for him to learn how a devil fought and what their traits were. Issei asked what she meant by traits. Rias explained that during the Great War the numbers on all sides had dwindled, and many pureblood clans of devils had been lost. Beelzebub had created the evil piece system based on chess to compensate. She said the pieces king, queen, bishops, knights, rooks, and pawns each had unique traits and roles. Issei understood that each piece had specialties and weaknesses. Rias smiled and praised his quick grasp. Rias continued that evil pieces were often used in raiding games. Aquino shook her head and pointed out that for Rias to appear as a participant she would need to meet certain requirements and could not yet appear in a proper arena. A heavy rumbling cut through the conversation as something large approached from the darkness. Rias announced that they had come to eliminate the stray devil visser. A disembodied voice from within the shadows spoke about smelling something curious and wanting to taste it. A woman appeared, floating in the air at first with her lower body hidden in shadow. When she stepped forward her lower half revealed a 4-legged, centaur-like form and she held a lance in each hand. Issei took in the strange sight without much surprise after seeing so many oddities before. Rias mocked the beast's appearance in a steady, unflinching tone. The monster snarled a threat and lunged toward them. Rias called for Hyoudou, and Kiba responded and sprinted forward with his sword. Rias used the moment to explain that Kiba was a knight and that knights benefited from increased speed. Kiba moved with practiced agility, dodging a spear move and disarming the creature so it could no longer use its lances. Rias noted Hyoudou's excellent swordsmanship. Rias then pointed out that Kaneko was a rook and a rook's strength lay in absolute power and high defense. The creature stamped down on Kaneko, and Issei worried for the small member of the club. In the next instant, Kaneko surprised everyone by lifting the creature and hurling it against the wall. The display underscored the rook's incredible strength. Akino stepped forward with a light, teasing laugh and asked if it was her turn. Rias explained that Akino was the queen, possessing a mix of traits from pawns, knights, bishops, and rooks. Akino focused and unleashed controlled bursts of elemental magic, calling down lightning that struck the wounded devil. She attacked with a composed intensity clearly experienced in magic and battle. Felt uneasy at Akino's vigorous approach, but Rias reassured him that Akino was loyal and protective of her comrades. Rias then called a halt to the assault and asked the rogue devil if it had any last words. The creature groaned a single, pained admission that it wished to be put down. Rias accepted that and unleashed a concentrated sealing and banishing spell that consumed the creature's presence and ended the threat without lingering gore. Issei watched the aftermath and murmured quietly about ashes and dust, reflecting on the finality of the moment. After the battle, Issei asked Rias which piece he would be if he joined her peerage. Rias said she had intended for him to become her pawn, a role that suited his potential and the way he could grow under her guidance. Issei smiled inwardly at the thought of being a pawn and considered what that might mean for him. Juggernaut Drive existed as the power of the boosted gear and divine dividing combined. In exchange for great strain on the user, it temporarily bypassed the seals on the two heavenly dragons and granted immense strength, the kind the dragons had once wielded. Even with such power, Issei, still young and inexperienced, could not stand alone against the full might of the Chaos Brigade. He bore numerous wounds and broken bones from fighting their forces despite his determination. The Dimension Lost was a separate ability that allowed one to use mist to transfer people and objects to another dimension, a technique with both strategic and hazardous implications. Rumor had it that George could transfer an entire town and its occupants at once. The Annihilation Maker was capable of creating monsters that defied the laws of physics, limited only by the imagination of its wielder, and powerful enough to destroy the world in the hands of certain people. The true Longinus, one of the 5 holy relics of the Church and the spear that pierced the side of Jesus Christ, was unquestionably the most powerful sacred gear. It spoke highly of Issei's skills that he had lasted 2 hours against them through sheer determination, injuring them all and even causing Cao Cao to lose vision in his left eye. Issei thought grimly, with what was left of his mind, that at least if he died he had left that man a reminder of who he was. As Issei began to rear up to fight the Chaos Brigade again, prepared to go down fighting, a voice cut through his haze and stopped him. Valley ordered him to stop and reminded him he had done enough. Issei barely registered Valley's presence, stunned. A playful teammate spoke in a light, teasing tone and agreed that Valley was right, offering to handle the enemy. One of Valley's teachers sighed and remarked that Valley should have introduced his rival at a better time, not while they were saving him from the Chaos Brigade. Valley activated Divide, and he, his platoon, and their teachers charged against the army. When Valley and his platoon and teachers attacked, Issei had only one thought. He hoped Valley would save her. Issei had accepted another request. He had been given a location, and to his surprise, this time the summoned contractor was female. He stood before the door of a large, expensive house in a wealthy neighborhood and announced that he was the temporary devil who had been summoned and apologized for the wait. A deep, gravelly voice answered from inside that the door was locked, and heavy footsteps approached. Issei worried the man approaching might be the homeowner. He hesitated at the thought of how to explain himself if asked whether he was the daughter's boyfriend. When the door opened, Issei forced a smile and tried to seem composed. The answer that greeted him came as a high, sing-song exclamation that made his smile vanish. Standing in the doorway was a bizarre sight. An enormous, heavily muscled figure wearing a gaudy magical girl costume and wig. The contrast between the imposing build and the costume was jarring. Issei felt his confidence falter and struggled to steady his voice as he explained that he had come to grant the contractor's wish. The contractor introduced himself as Miltan and demanded to be turned into a magical girl, striking a dramatic pose in the costume. Issei felt increasingly unsettled by the spectacle. Issei suggested, a bit awkwardly, that Miltan might try seeking help elsewhere, even joking about distant places. Miltan replied that he had already tried other options but had not been granted any powers. Faced with that, Issei said that he was sorry but could not give him powers. Miltan then flexed his muscles in a sudden display of force, his voice shifting into a deep, commanding roar as he demanded his magical girl powers. Issei felt overwhelmed and frightened. At that moment, Issei's fellow club members were holding a meeting about him. Akino observed that he seemed to know more than he let on. Rias agreed that she had the same impression. Hyoudou noted that his sacred gear had taken the form of a twice critical, and that they had expected something more from someone like him. Rias recalled from the Gremory library that a twice critical could be, or at least resemble, the boosted gear. Kaneko asked if he might be a wielder of a Longinus. One of the others, amused, remarked that such a powerful weapon could be hiding in plain sight and that the description fit: a crimson gauntlet, the Red Dragon Emperor. Rias added that, from the way he carried himself, it seemed he knew what the artifact was and how to use it. Kiba wondered why he would lie about such a thing, since being chosen to wield one of the 13 Longinus was normally a point of pride. After a thoughtful silence, Kaneko proposed that something in his past might be the reason he kept quiet about it. The others agreed that his reticence about his history could explain a lot. Rias cautioned that until they could confirm anything, it was only speculation. Akino asked Rias what she thought. Rias said that she still wanted him on their side regardless of his past, suggesting that if he was what they suspected, he might help her with her own personal situation. The rest of her peerage agreed. When Issei woke up the next morning, he stared at the ceiling of his room, unsettled by the dream of failure he had had. He dismissed the idea that a dream could be a prophecy, but the feeling lingered. He got up to prepare for school and glanced at the clock. When he realized the time, panic set in. He hurried through his morning routine, showered and dressed as quickly as he could, and ran out the door for school. It was a Saturday. Issei stared at the empty gates of the school in front of him. He forced a nod, pretending to accept his mistakes, though inwardly he scoffed at himself for forgetting the day. Issei roared in anger at the realization that it was a Saturday and could not believe he had not known. He then muttered that he would go to the park and, slumped in post-anger exhaustion, dragged himself there. After getting drinks and sitting on a bench, he let himself relax. The breeze was cool, the sun hidden behind clouds, and the atmosphere peaceful. He wondered about Ophis and whether she had been all right. He told himself she was powerful and likely safe, but he hoped the others had managed to get out safely. Asia called his name from nearby. Issei noticed her and thought it surprising since she had only just been assigned to the church the day before. Asia explained awkwardly, with a shy smile, that she had wanted to see him and had come to check if he was here. Issei felt a warm fondness for her innocence and told her that he had wanted to see her too and wanted to know how she was adjusting to town. Both of their stomachs groaned at the same time, and they blushed at the embarrassment. Issei invited Asia to have lunch with him and offered to pay. She accepted. Issei watched as the blonde stared at the menu in confused fascination. He realized how sheltered she was and, after a few minutes, decided to help by telling the server to give her the same as him. When the food arrived, Asia hesitated over the burger and asked, hesitantly, whether utensils were available. Issei explained that burgers were usually eaten with the hands and demonstrated, biting into his meal. Asia's eyes lit up with wonder as she tried it herself and smiled. Later, Asia pointed to a building across the street and asked what it was. Issei explained that it was a game center, a place where friends could play and have fun. Asia's face grew pensive at the mention of friends, and Issei, seeing her sadness, made up his mind to cheer her up. He insisted that they go and play, saying he would not take no for an answer. Asia nodded and went with him. They spent the afternoon at the game center, enjoying the attractions and each other's company. Asia was having the best day of her life. She and Issei did many things in the game center. She lost at a car game, easily beat Issei at a fighting game, and they even used a photo booth together. Asia would cherish the photos of them smiling and laughing forever. Asia pressed against a claw machine and told Issei that the dolls inside were so cute. Issei identified the plushie as Domo and offered to try to get it for her. Asia agreed politely. She watched as Issei worked the machine and, after a few attempts, managed to retrieve the doll. Issei handed the plushie to Asia, and Asia thanked him warmly, promising to take care of it. As the sun began to set, they left the game center and walked to the park, sitting on a bench by the fountain. After a few moments of quiet, Asia asked Issei if he knew about sacred gears. Issei replied that he did. Asia then revealed that her sacred gear was the Twilight Healing, the power to heal. Issei praised her power as amazing and hinted that his was different. Asia, who had not heard the final part, began to cry, and Issei immediately apologized, saying he had not meant to make her cry. Asia shook her head and explained that she had remembered something, and a tense silence settled between them. Asia asked Issei if she could tell a story, and after he nodded she began. She described a girl abandoned by her parents who grew up in a church orphanage. At 8 years old, the girl awakened a power when she found an injured dog and healed it. The people of the church hailed her as a saint, and Christians from the town came to be healed. Despite being praised and surrounded by people, the girl felt profoundly lonely. Asia continued that one day the girl encountered a wounded devil being pursued by an exorcist, and she used her power to help him. The devil fought the exorcist, and in the chaotic clash the exorcist was defeated before the devil fled. When the church learned what had happened, they cried heresy and cast the girl out, accusing her of aiding devils. Asia said she had only wanted to help and that her dream was to be with friends, to talk and experience things with them, and to simply be normal. Asia looked down and flinched as a hand ruffled her hair. Issei asked if they were friends. Asia was confused, and Issei assured her that they already were friends, reminding her of the time they had spent together and promising to be there for her when she wanted company or comfort. Tears filled Asia's eyes as she listened, and she told Issei his kindness meant a great deal to her. Their quiet moment felt perfect until a cold voice interrupted. Asia turned with wide eyes and saw a fallen angel hovering above the fountain. Issei's eyes narrowed as he watched the fallen angel, and he moved to put himself between her and Asia. The fallen angel identified herself as Rainier and ordered Asia to return, claiming they had work to do. Asia nodded and stepped forward when Rainier reached out toward her. Issei protested fiercely, warning Asia not to go with a fallen angel, but Asia ignored him and walked toward Rainier. Rainier mocked Issei, asking if he had fallen for Asia and taunting him. She accused him of having done something to her memory in the past and vowed to make him pay, forming a spear of light that hummed with hostile energy. Issei tensed at the threat. Asia moved in front of him, shielding him, and pleaded with Rainier to let him go. After a few tense seconds, Rainier snorted and the spear dissolved into light. She told Issei he had been spared this time but warned that she would settle the score she believed he owed. Rainier then turned to Asia and instructed her to come with her. Issei was torn and horrified. He knew that if he interfered, the fallen angel might attack and nothing, not even the devil's protection, would guarantee safety for him or anyone connected to him. A cold, selfish thought told him to leave Asia behind as a burden, but he remembered another girl who had been adored by many yet been painfully lonely. Asia told Issei that he was kind, and Issei realized he had never hated himself as much as he did in that moment. Asia said goodbye to Issei as Rainier carried her away to their headquarters, the church on the outskirts of town. Issei watched them go, feeling disgusted with himself as he struggled with his helplessness. Issei biked in a sour mood to the home of his next summoner, still replaying everything that had happened. At the Occult Research Club earlier, Rias had given him the location of his next contract and asked whether he was all right, expressing skepticism when he insisted he was fine. He had left abruptly, ending the conversation. On the road he argued with himself, wondering why he had stood by and done nothing. He considered the possibility that Asia might have been deceived, clung to the thought that she would not purposely betray anyone, then berated himself for being so quick to trust after only knowing her 2 days. He imagined darker alternatives and refused to accept them. He reminded himself that she was his friend. He resolved to go to the church the next day and clear things up, but for now he had a contract to complete. Issei called out at the house, heard no answer, and after a few moments pushed the door open despite a nagging unease. The smell of blood hit him as he moved through the rooms. In the living room he found a body displayed in a brutal, ritualistic manner. Signs of violence were obvious but gruesome detail was absent. A man in clerical clothes stood nearby with an eerie, triumphant grin, ranting about punishing devil summoners and mocking him. The man introduced himself as Fried Selzen and made it clear he intended to kill Issei, taunting him and shouting that killing heretics was a righteous act. Then Fried lunged with a firearm and a glowing blade, weapons designed to harm devils. Issei recognized them instantly and evaded the first shot with a quick tilt of his head. The priest barked insults and unleashed a barrage that would have overwhelmed almost anyone, but Issei moved through it with controlled ease and closed the distance. Fried swung at him. Issei caught the attacking wrist and forced it down until the priest released the blade. Fried continued to curse and struggle as Issei held him, but the moment was interrupted when Issei glanced toward the doorway and saw Asia standing there, eyes wide with shock. Asia had come with Father Fried, she had begun, and then she froze at the sight of the scene. Fried cruelly forced her to look and struck her to keep her eyes open as he justified his actions, insisting this was necessary to keep people from being corrupted. Asia pleaded for him to stop while attempting to pull away. The sight of Asia struggling pushed Issei toward attack, but a summoning circle flared in the middle of the room and members of the Occult Research Club arrived all at once. Kiba stepped in front of Issei and restrained him before he could lash out. Kiba warned that while Issei was powerful, a direct fight then could spark a larger conflict. They were facing a fallen angel's influence while Issei functioned as a devil, and the consequences could be severe. Fried seized the moment, scooped up Asia, and activated a concealed talisman that filled the room with a blinding flash. When the light faded, Fried and Asia were gone. Issei cried out in frustration and demanded to know why he had been stopped, but Kiba and the others urged restraint and explained the risks once more. Issei refused to be deterred. He vowed to save Asia no matter what it took and turned on his heel, sprinting toward the direction of the church. Memories of other failures and the warm, simple moments he had shared with Asia fueled his determination. He had failed to protect someone once before. He swore he would not let that happen again. He shouted Asia's name as he entered the church basement, a cavernous space that seemed able to contain the whole building above. Around him, the followers of the fallen angels stood ready, dressed like the crazed priest who hung frozen overhead, glaring and prepared to strike at a moment's notice. Asia was bound to a wooden cross. Beside her, Rainier wore a plain white dress. He feared he would be too late to save her. Rainier announced that he had indeed made it this far but that the ritual had already begun and, in a few minutes, she would claim the girl's sacred gear. Issei, desperate, offered to let everyone leave unharmed if they freed Asia, promising to put the matter behind them. Rainier sneered at him and reminded him of the promise she intended to repay for their previous encounter, then ordered her followers to kill him. Issei trembled with rage. Flames kindled on his hands and forehead, his eyes glowing a golden orange. He whispered the name of his sacred gear, and crimson metal gloves erupted over his hands as the flames were drawn into it. He activated his power, declaring the 0-point breakthrough, absolute zero. The room was suddenly coated in ice, the followers frozen in their tracks. Only Asia, Rainier, and Issei remained unaffected. Issei walked through the frozen hall toward the altar where Asia was placed. Rainier stepped aside, stunned by the scene. When he reached them, he greeted Asia softly, reminding her that he had promised to be there when she was sad. He smiled down at her and told her they would still have things to do together, naming small, innocent plans like going ice skating. Asia returned his smile and said she was glad to have a friend like him and wished she had more time. She thanked him for everything he had done for her and gave a peaceful smile. Issei pleaded with her to wake, desperately naming the things they still had to do and saying he could not lose her. He gently laid her body down and crossed his arms over his chest in grief. He acknowledged that revenge would not bring her back, but still felt compelled to act, if not for himself then for her. He stood and faced the fallen angel. Rainier backed away until Issei fixed her with his glowing orange eyes, a stare that made her shiver. Issei declared that what he was about to do was for Asia. Asia's eyes opened again. She asked Issei not to kill anyone for her sake and said she did not want him to do something like that. She urged him not to kill anymore and to help people. She told him that Draig was kind. Her words hit him like a shock. One part of him urged revenge, but another begged for restraint and peace. He looked at Asia, who had come back simply to stop him from spilling more blood, and then at the resigned fallen angel before him. Issei closed his eyes, thought of Asia's kindness, and dismissed his gauntlet. He told Rainier to go, saying he would honor Asia's final request and let her live. He snapped his fingers, freeing the frozen exorcists around them. Rainier asked why. Issei answered that he owed it to a dying girl to fulfill her wish, and that her kindness mattered. He was careful with his words and then told Rainier to leave if she wished. After a hesitant moment, Rainier spread her wings and flew away. Alone with the frozen followers, Issei staggered to the altar and slumped down against it. He looked at the blonde woman and smiled, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. He mused that she had reminded him of someone innocent and trusting and imagined how well they would have gotten along. He wondered what to do next. He worried his parents would be concerned, the devils might look for him, and the fallen angels could report him. He let himself laugh at the thought that Asia would probably scold him for resorting to violence, picturing her playful reprimand. At that moment, he noticed devils walking through the door. He called out for Bucho, picked up Asia's body, and rushed over to them. He knelt and prostrated himself before them. Issei begged Rias to reincarnate her, his voice on the verge of breaking yet filled with tentative hope that clawed at everyone's hearts. He pleaded for her to be saved and brought back to life, promising to do anything, even to join her peerage. Rias shushed him and told him not to speak. She said she did not need anything from him and that, if it was his request, she would do it. She assured him she would reincarnate her. For the first time in 3 years, Issei broke down in tears and gratefully embraced Rias, who returned the gesture gently and soothingly. He sobbed harder. Issei was nearly at the entrance of the church when the flapping of wings reached his ears. He looked up to find 3 fallen angels hovering above him, staring down. Danasik, the fallen angel who had tried to kill him before, noted that Issei had come just as expected and observed that since Issei had arrived alone, this might be their chance to stop him before he caused any more trouble. Another fallen angel jeered that this was the one who had interfered with Rainier and had defeated Danasik, mocking Issei's apparent weakness. The final companion, a tall woman with long hair obscuring her right eye, declared that creatures like him needed to be crushed and made to know their place. Issei shouted that he did not have time for them. He extended his hands and orange fire flared to life, dressing his palms in a soft golden light. The fallen angels reacted with surprise as the flames sprang outward, momentarily enveloping them before crystallizing into a layer of ice. The frozen trio cried out in confusion and anger, but Issei ignored them and ran straight to the church door, slamming it open. Underneath the cross stood Fried. Issei asked where she was, his voice soft but carrying a warning. Fried greeted him nervously and, startled at Issei's sudden arrival, blurted that Rainier had already started the ceremony and that they were too late, but he was cut off as Issei suddenly appeared before him with his hands crossed. Issei invoked 0-point breakthrough. Rias and her peerage stepped out of the summoning circle and took in the impossible sight. The 3 fallen angels encased in ice that resisted all efforts to break it. Aquino approached and examined the frozen substance, puzzled by its appearance. It looked like ice, but she could sense the unmistakable presence of fire within it. The imprisoned angels demanded to be freed, but Rias refused. The captives fell silent, and Kaneko suggested that Hyoudou Issei was the only one who could have done something like this. Rias agreed that, whatever had happened, they needed to assist Issei. The Occult Research Club moved toward the church. One of the frozen angels continued to taunt them about not being freed, while another ordered them to be quiet. They emerged from the underground cavern into the church itself, where Asia's body lay at the center of a devil's circle. Rias asked Issei if he was certain he wanted Asia to be reincarnated as a devil. Issei affirmed that he was. Rias closed her eyes and spoke a command in her name to call Asia back as her servant and return her to life as a devil. The wind rose as the bishop piece sank slowly into Asia's form, Rias declaring that Asia would live this life as her bishop. When the light faded, the piercings in Asia's hands and feet were gone. She opened her eyes and whispered Issei's name. Rias informed Issei that he could go to her. Issei approached Asia slowly, embraced her, and tears of joy flowed down his face at the sight of his friend alive. Asia returned the embrace, and the warmth of her presence reassured him that she had truly come back. It was the morning after the fallen angel incident when Issei entered the occult research club and greeted Rias. Issei offered a polite good morning, and Rias returned the greeting with a smile. He sat down in front of the president and thanked her for what she had done the previous night. Rias smiled and told him she had already said not to worry. Issei insisted he felt he needed to repay his debt, but Rias shook her head and said that his presence was enough. She admitted she wanted to know what he had done to those fallen angels, since she had never seen anything like it. Issei mumbled that it was magic. Rias said she thought she finally understood what he really was, the Hyoudou of this generation, the bearer of the boosted gear, the Red Dragon Emperor's Gauntlet, one of the 13 Longinus, sacred gears capable of killing gods. She added that she suspected he was also an ability user from what she had seen and said she felt lucky to have met him. Rias reached out and placed her hand gently on his forehead, calling it a good luck charm and offering a quiet blessing. She told him that if he chose to become a devil, she hoped the charm would help him, and for now encouraged him to keep doing what he was doing. Issei nodded and rubbed his forehead. Rias then remarked that they should be careful or a new member might get jealous. Issei turned and saw Asia standing near the door. Asia, now a member of Rias's peerage, fretted that Rias's beauty was why Issei was attracted to her and playfully declared she needed to step up. Then she remembered that, now being a devil, she could no longer speak to the Lord and winced at the realization. She sighed mournfully and said she had become a devil. Issei, unsure how to respond, asked if she regretted it. Asia assured him she did not mind, so long as she could be with him, and she thanked Rias for giving her this life, bowing respectfully to her new master. Rias expressed that she was glad and asked Issei to take good care of Asia, explaining that she had arranged for Asia to attend Crow Academy and be placed in Issei's class. Issei proudly promised that he would, which made Asia blush. Issei imagined how their friends would react, picturing outraged questions and demands for explanations about him being with a beautiful blonde foreigner, but he did not hear them yet. Akino, Kaneko, and Kiba entered the room together and greeted Rias, Issei, and Asia. Asia bowed in return. Rias announced that since everyone was present, they would start a small celebration. As she spoke, cake, food, and drinks appeared on the previously empty table. Rias explained that they were there to celebrate Asia joining her peerage and that she had prepared the food, inviting everyone to enjoy themselves. Agreement and cheerful chatter followed her invitation. After the party, Issei returned home. It was already dark and his parents were sleeping, so he went to his room and entered the bathroom. Once he closed the door, his body began to shake uncontrollably and he leaned both hands on the sink. His voice was hoarse as he asked Draig how bad it was. Draig's answer was blunt and dry, noting that the situation was worse than expected and that Issei should not be too hard on himself. Draig reminded him that by all rights he should not still be alive after using Juggernaut Drive and that surviving as long as he had was remarkable. A normal human could not be expected to last in that form for even a short time. Issei had managed to endure significantly longer. Issei started to say something else but was interrupted by a violent coughing fit. Hunched against the sink, he looked up and saw his reflection in the mirror. Now that he was alone, he let himself look weak. His face was pale and tired, and a faint streak marked his chin. He sat alone in the bathroom for a long time before asking Draig how much longer he had. Draig estimated, in measured tones, that if Issei avoided further supernatural contact and magic, 5 years might be possible, though given his involvement with devils and fallen, a more realistic estimate was about 1.5 years. Draig apologized and conveyed the harsh reality. Issei listened with detached eyes. He thought about everything he had done and asked, to Draig, whether it would be selfish to want to live longer to be with his friends and do more of the things he still hoped to experience. Draig answered with deep, almost weary affection, saying that Issei was the best partner he had ever had and that he deserved a better fate. He praised Issei's resilience, noting how Issei had managed to resist the Juggernaut Drive's curse on his own. Grateful for the encouragement, Issei brightened a little as he listed things he still wanted to do and people he wanted to see. He reminded himself of promises he had made, including one to return to Kyoto to meet someone again when she was older. The small, steady litany of plans and names helped him face the limited time he might have left. If that was all he had, he resolved to make the most of it. Strangely enough, his mind had been distracted earlier in the day by an odd thought about boxes. Later, when he arrived home, Rias and Asia were standing in the entrance, as if waiting for him. Issei looked at the boxes and could only manage a confused expression when Rias told him to carry them to his room. Rias explained that the boxes contained Asia's belongings and informed Issei that Asia would be staying with him starting that day. Issei's life felt more lively than ever. Rias explained the situation to Issei's parents and asked if they would allow Asia to stay with them. Issei felt their calculating gazes and the sudden lack of trust from his own family. Issei's father warned that Asia might be safer staying elsewhere because their son had a troublesome reputation and could be relied on to cause complications. Issei protested that he was present and could be trusted to behave. The voice in his head, Drake, muttered something sharp, and Issei told it to be quiet. His mother nodded, reluctantly agreeing that he could be untrustworthy at times. Unfazed by the hesitation, Rias suggested that Asia become part of the household. The Hyoudou family reacted in surprise. Issei's father asked what she meant. Rias explained that Asia trusted Issei and that he had been dependable when she arrived, helping her and supporting her at school. Asia confirmed that Issei had helped her and that she wanted to stay with him. The parents exchanged astonished looks and asked one another if they were really hearing that their son had someone willing to stay with him. The mother and father found themselves unexpectedly moved by the idea. Rias proposed that Asia stay to train and prepare for the future as part of the family. The suggestion stunned everyone, including Issei, while Asia looked puzzled. Issei's relatives reacted with a mix of disbelief and joy at the prospect of grandchildren and at the thought that Issei might not be alone after all. Haruka took Asia's hands, tears in his eyes, and asked her to look after Issei. Issei pointed out that he was listening, but Asia smiled and gently reassured the family that Issei was not useless. She described him as kind and dependable. Issei's father turned to Rias and, moved by the situation, offered to take Asia into their home. Rias accepted the offer and asked Asia to get along with Issei's parents. Asia hesitated, worried about causing trouble, but Rias reminded her that she had expressed a desire to stay with Issei. The parents encouraged her warmly, insisting she was welcome to stay as long as she liked and that she might even become part of the household permanently. Asia agreed to be in their care. The decision for her to stay in the Hyoudou home was settled by that conversation. Rias let out a short, wistful sigh about the idea of a bride, and Issei realized that life at home was about to become even more hectic than it already was. Issei examined the shurnai in his hand, noting the tiger stripe design and the unsettling aura it gave off. He asked Drake where he had gotten it. Drake told him it had come from the tiger yukai back in Kyoto. Issei decided it needed to be stored more safely and placed the instrument in a wooden case specially made to suppress and conceal magical items. After Asia moved into the house, Issei had begun keeping the trophies he had collected over the years locked away to prevent her from finding them. He next picked up another blade and wondered about it. Drake identified it as Hrunting, recovered in England. Issei frowned at the absurdity of owning so many weapons he could not properly use, swung Hrunting once, then shrugged and put it into its own case. He spent hours cleaning the basement and found a strange assortment of relics: the Shroud of Turin, Carnwennen, a replica of Aegis, Turfing, a cornucopia, and even a golden apple from the Garden of Hesperides. Then he froze when he came across one particular item. Hesitantly he lifted it. The spear was barbed and dark red, nearly as long as he was tall, with serpentine runes etched along it. Even in that calm light, its presence felt wrong. This was a weapon forged for battle, feared for what it could do. Drake, sensing the change in his partner, asked if that was Gibalg. Issei identified it as Gibalg. Issei remembered the spear's origins. It had been formed from the bones of a legendary sea monster, and it carried a curse that altered the normal rules of cause and effect. When activated, it made a strike's outcome unavoidable, ensuring the wielder's intent was carried out. It had been given to him by the Chaos Brigade because of how effective he had been in battle. He knew it should not be here. He had discarded it the day he learned of the Chaos Brigade's betrayal. He could not explain how it had returned. Drake urged him to calm down. Issei took a deep breath, fought back rising panic, and placed the spear into another case with deliberate hands. He resolved to investigate the mystery later. A memory surfaced. A drunk man had loitered in the night and warned the lone child that it was dangerous to be out alone. His companions snickered while the child stood quietly, clutching the spear in a hand that still seemed too small. The man asked to borrow the spear. The child offered to give it away. In an instant, the spear reacted as if commanded, and the scene unfolded with frightening speed. The spear's power erupted, and the nearest attackers were thrown back and incapacitated in a flash of crimson light and force, their bodies dropping as if the ground had opened beneath them. The attackers tried to regroup, drawing their own swords, but they were overwhelmed as the weapon moved with uncanny precision. Issei, as the boy, summoned his gauntlet over his left arm in response. One soldier recognized him and shouted that he was the demon child, then turned to flee. In the next heartbeat, the soldier was struck down by a single swift motion. He collapsed without any lingering struggle. The boy flicked the spear casually as the scene quieted. Facing the remaining terrified crowd, he advanced with a calm, eerie blankness on his face, moving forward with a resolve that chilled those who watched. A female student shouted that she would never accept this. Another student demanded why Asia was with Hyoudou. A third voice pointed out that it was not just Rias but even Asia, and asked what was going on. Issei should have known this would happen. Of the three notorious perverts at school, walking with Asia Argento, the sweet and naive transfer student, was bound to stir rumors. Because he had been seen with Asia, other boys assumed they could try the same and had been confessing to her on the way to school, all of which she had politely turned down. Now many students glared at his back. Issei basked a little in the attention, amused by the boy's jealousy. Asia, however, fidgeted at his stare and asked if there was something wrong with her. Issei apologized and explained that he had been lost in thought. He asked how school was going and whether she was having any problems adjusting. He worried because she had only recently left the convent and might have trouble adapting to everyday life, and he wanted her to have friends as well as his help. Asia smiled gently and said that everyone at school was kind and had been helping her learn more about Japan. She added that she had been invited to go shopping at the mall with some classmates. They arrived at class, and in the middle of the room sat the duo who caused Issei equal parts amusement and annoyance. Matsuda and Motohama greeted Asia eagerly, praising the shine of her blonde hair and wiggling with excitement when she returned their greeting. Issei, with a small arrogant smile, shook his head at how easily they were pleased. Motohama suddenly jabbed Issei in the stomach. Surprised and angry, Issei demanded to know why. Motohama accused him of spreading rumors and demanded an explanation for walking with Asia. Matsuda chimed in, pressing the same point. The classroom, and even students outside, leaned in to listen. Issei downplayed it, but Asia answered with a soft smile that she was staying at Issei's house because his parents had kindly taken her in. The announcement fell into an awkward silence. Matsuda protested as if unable to accept it, while Motohama reacted with disbelief that Issei could be living with a blonde beauty. Matsuda then turned serious and asked Issei to introduce them to any women he knew, pleading that they be allowed to meet someone. Issei thought privately that he had no intention of letting them meet anyone, but outwardly he agreed and offered to try to help them find dates. He took out his phone and called a friend he trusted to be around the two of them. After a short conversation, Issei passed along the contact information and said that the friend would be free on Friday and might bring others. Matsuda and Motohama grabbed the phone and copied the number eagerly. They asked what kind of person the friend was. Issei described her as someone who liked to cosplay. The two reacted with delighted exclamations and thanked him profusely, leaving Issei feeling a little guilty for indulging them. They wondered aloud whether someone nicknamed Miltan might be a gothic lover, but Issei shook his head. He let them enjoy their speculation for now. Issei immediately slumped onto his bed the moment he and Asia got home. He had been exhausted after spending the whole day with her. He worried about her first day as a devil. She was too kind to refuse the requests she received. He tried not to dwell on the inappropriate requests they had encountered. After much pleading on Issei's part, Rias had allowed him to accompany Asia on her summon. It had been a relatively easy assignment compared to some of his previous ones. The memory of Miltan in those unusual clothes made Issei wince. Asia bustled into the kitchen and told everyone she was going to cook dinner. Rias's mother praised Asia for being so helpful, and the household expressed how fortunate they were to have her. Issei sighed and tried to get up, but a magic circle flared on the floor. A figure with distinctive red hair stepped from the circle. Rias had returned and the summoning glow faded behind her. Before she could speak, a silver-haired maid appeared and addressed Rias with a measured, formal tone. The maid identified herself as Graphia and reminded Rias that, as heiress of the Gremory family, she should compose herself and that the family had summoned her. Graphia urged Rias to put on her proper attire. Issei tensed as the maid's posture briefly suggested readiness for conflict, and he instinctively prepared to defend himself, filing away the maid's movements for later. The tension almost reached a breaking point, but Rias stopped everything by asking if she could bring a kino as well. Graphia considered the request and agreed that it would be fitting for the queen to have her companion present. Rias then apologized to Issei for the disturbance and asked him to forget the awkwardness. Before stepping into the summoning circle, Rias gave Issei a quick, affectionate peck on the cheek and asked to meet again the next day. With Graphia at her side and a kino mentioned, the two of them vanished in the flash of a summoning. Issei stood there stunned and admitted to himself that he did not understand what had just happened. Asia called again to warn him the food was getting cold. He shook his head, still unsettled by the exchange, and went downstairs to get dinner. Asia had made miso soup that night. After school, Issei and Asia walked to the occult research club room together. On the way, they ran into Kiba, who suggested that the club president's problem might be connected to the House Gremory since Rias was the heiress. They entered the room and found Rias's peerage present, along with Graphia, whose presence surprised Issei. Graphia offered to explain the situation to Rias. Rias declined and took a deep breath, preparing to tell the truth. Before she could, the magic in the room intensified and a summoning circle appeared on the floor. Flames flared up around the circle in an anime-style display of power. A silhouette moved within the fire, and as it swung its arms the flames died down to reveal a tall, handsome man in his 20s wearing a burgundy blazer over a white dress shirt, matching pants, and black. He announced that he had come to the human world just to see Rias. Rias's glare was fierce, but the man did not seem bothered and stepped closer. He reminded her that they still needed to inspect ceremony halls and plan the reception, since the date was already set and they had to check locations before the deadline. Issei had never seen Rias so angry. Graphia intervened before the confrontation could escalate and explained to those unfamiliar that this was Riser Phoenix, a pure-blooded, high-class devil, the third son of House Phoenix, and that he was Rias's fiancé. Issei tensed and reached instinctively for a weapon that was not there. He noticed Graphia observe his movement and realized that she was indeed a dangerous individual. Aquino praised the tea, noting it was delicious as expected from Rias' queen. She smiled, but Issei noticed the smile did not reach her eyes. An icy look had settled over them and he could feel the change in the room's temperature. Rias sat on the couch with Riser at her side, his hands resting on her shoulders as he played with her hair. Issei stared at Riser, his eyes flickering orange with interest. After several tense minutes, Rias lost her patience and told Riser to stop, insisting she was not going to marry him. Riser challenged her, arguing that she needed to consider her family and the future of the Gremory clan. He warned that pure-blooded devils were rare and that protecting the household should take precedence over personal preference. Rias countered firmly that she was the heir of the Gremory clan and that, while she accepted the duties of her position and the idea of taking a husband, she would choose whom she married. She declared that she would not accept a man chosen for her. Riser's expression darkened and the air around him shimmered with heat as his anger rose into a dramatic display of power. He threatened possession and domination, claiming he would take her as his wife and burn anyone who stood in his way. His display of power manifested as swirling flames around him in an anime-like flare of energy. Asia gripped Issei's arm, trembling at the hostile aura. Kaneko and Kiba braced for a fight, and Akino, despite her composed exterior, radiated a strong resolve as if ready for battle. Graphia stepped forward and intervened, warning that if they pressed further she would not hold back. That single intervention was enough to freeze everyone in place. Riser's flames subsided and he conceded for the moment, acknowledging that he would withdraw for now. Rias and the others learned that their masters had anticipated a confrontation and established a final recourse, an unofficial rating game between the two parties. The announcement surprised everyone. Rias reacted with bitterness at the thought that her life was being arranged for her, but she soon accepted that she would fight Riser Phoenix to win her freedom. Graphia confirmed she would oversee the match and both sides agreed to the arrangement. Riser boasted that his peerage would outmatch Rias' servants. To demonstrate, he snapped his fingers and an identical sigil appeared behind him, from which 15 people emerged. He made a theatrical show of intimidation to emphasize his confidence. The tense standoff was interrupted by a young-looking blonde girl with drill-like twin ponytails and a light purple dress who pointed at Issei and insisted she recognized him from 2 years before. Issei clarified his name and the misunderstanding was quickly dismissed. Riser then set the terms. He gave Rias 2 weeks to prepare, announcing that their next encounter would be at the rating game and that she should choose a wedding dress. With that proclamation, Riser and his peerage departed in a column of flame, leaving Rias alone with her peerage and Graphia to prepare for the coming challenge. After the commotion in the club room, Issei was relieved to be back in the quiet of his home, alone with his thoughts and the ever-present voice of his partner, Drake. Drake asked why he had decided to become a devil. Issei admitted it had been a spur-of-the-moment decision. Drake expressed disbelief, and Issei repeated that she simply reminded him of himself. Drake snorted and said it was laughable to compare someone like her to him. Issei replied that everyone had problems, some worse than others. Drake pressed for specifics about what had reminded him of his situation. Issei considered the question and said she had been forced into circumstances she never asked for, robbed of her choices. She had done all she could and still failed. She had someone who could help her escape a bleak future and had refused to take that chance. She stood alone, surrounded by people who did not believe in her and who would not let her take control of her own fate. Drake countered that nothing she did put Issei in her debt. He had no obligation to fight for her. He argued that even if she reminded Issei of himself, it would be expected for him to turn away. Issei scratched at his chest and acknowledged the logic, but said he felt compelled to act. He wanted to prevent others from suffering what he had been through. Drake promised, with a touch of sardonic amusement, that no one would have to go through what Issei had endured. Issei smiled faintly and asked what else he could do. He believed this was all he was good for. Drake warned that that mindset would get him killed, especially in their world, and finally stopped trying to dissuade him gently. Issei laughed and insisted he did not plan to die anytime soon. His eyes took on an inexplicable orange hue and his voice grew firmer as he said that if he were going to die, he would not be having this conversation. Drake accused him of accepting a life of being under someone else's command, calling it wrong and harshly labeling him a hypocrite for opposing others' subjugation while submitting himself. Issei answered simply that he would accept it. Drake asked why. Issei explained that he wanted to help people and make a difference. He wanted to be someone others could look up to, even if he felt undeserving. He wanted to leave a mark so that people would remember he had lived as a person. If being a pawn helped him achieve that, he would accept it. Drake reflected on Issei's words with a rare wave of pity. He thought Issei did not deserve the hardships he had endured. More than most, Drake believed, Issei should be allowed to find happiness. Issei felt a relief he had not experienced in a long time. The constant pain that had accompanied him since leaving the Chaos Brigade after that disastrous fight had eased. It was still present, but far more tolerable than a few weeks earlier. Drake noted that Issei was now a devil and that their bodies were inherently stronger than humans and lived longer, which had increased Issei's life force. That boost made his life far less precarious. He would likely live for at least a couple hundred years. Drake admitted he might owe the devil girl a debt for that. Issei lay on the school rooftop, having decided to cut classes after being reborn as a devil. He used the time to observe the changes the ritual had made. The transformation had strengthened his body and altered his life force. Issei thought about life force as an anchor that kept a soul within a body. Every living being possessed it, but only a percentage of humans could use it to interact with the supernatural. Even fewer developed abilities from it. Those gifted individuals were called espers. Life force not only tethered the soul but also enabled interaction with natural energy. When applied skillfully, that energy could enhance the body-sharpening senses, enabling precognition, improving healing, and making the body more resilient. There was a cost, however. Overuse could distort the mind, which was why most people stuck to the more dependable aspects of supernatural practice. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts. A glasses-wearing teenager with violet eyes and a bob cut of black hair approached. Issei looked up and offered that he had been resting there. The girl told him that did not excuse cutting classes. Issei protested, asking her to cut him some slack since he was a newly revived devil. She replied that, as student council president, it was her responsibility to ensure every student fulfilled their obligations, new devil or not. Issei muttered that he had not voted for her, leaving the exchange hanging as the student council president prepared to insist on the rules. A student council member explained that students did not vote for the student council president. The school selected the position based on ability and capability. Issei, amused by the exchange, referenced a line from his favorite movies about supreme executive power coming from a mandate of the masses rather than being handed down from above. Another member of the council asked Issei to be quiet and to come with. Issei protested that no student could be expected to go just because someone ordered it. The young man with short blonde hair and gray eyes snapped and declared that Issei should go to class, insisting it was an order from the student council president. He stepped forward and gripped Issei's arm, pulling him up with a firm tug. Issei mocked the scene, theatrically accusing the system of violence and pretending to be oppressed. Sona sighed in the background, feeling a headache forming. Issei reached for a cup of tea. After Riser left, the club room felt heavy with somber thoughts. Graphia, the silver-haired maid, addressed him with a single word to draw his attention. The other club members looked at him, relieved by the distraction. Issei acknowledged that she meant him. Graphia observed that the young lady held him in high regard despite him not being a devil and asked why he had not defended her. Rias began to respond, but Graphia pressed the matter, asking his opinion. Issei replied that the young lady should have accepted the marriage arrangement. The room reacted in shocked surprise. Rias looked betrayed. Issei explained that, from a political standpoint, Riser had been correct. As a future clan head, she had to consider clan affairs over personal feelings. He stared at his tea as everyone glared at him, except Graphia, who wore a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Graphia then asked what he truly felt. The cup shattered in his hand, startling the room. Issei rose, and his gaze burned with fierce intensity. He declared that everyone deserved a chance to fight for themselves and that no one had the right to take away another's free will or decide their fate for them. It was wrong for someone's freedom to be suppressed and for a person to be reduced to acting solely for others. Each person alone should decide their path. He fixed his gaze on the group and then on Rias, whose eyes were full of unshed tears. He offered to fight for her and to be her pawn if she would have him, promising to work to free her. Rias, unable to trust her voice, nodded and accepted him as her champion. Graphia smiled. Issei walked into the club room after classes ended, not entirely sure why he had waited. The whole club was already there and apparently expecting him. Issei greeted everyone with an easy smile. Rias teased that he already seemed to have adjusted to being a devil and smiled at the newest member of her peerage. Rias announced that they were going on a training trip into Gremory territory and that she had obtained the school's permission. She then asked Issei about the rumors involving the student council. Issei admitted that he had been quoting Monty Python. Rias asked him to tell the story on the way there. She left the room with her peerage following behind. They arrived at a mountainside villa belonging to the Gremory clan. The clan's holdings encompassed the whole mountain. Issei felt uncertain about what to do next. Rias instructed everyone to put their belongings in the living room and then find their bedrooms. Issei set down the large pack he had been carrying. After completing chores such as cleaning and airing the house, they gathered in the kitchen. Rias asked Issei and Asia to demonstrate their abilities so the group could formulate a plan. Asia apologized that she did not know much about fighting and had only used her sacred gear. Rias said she had expected that. Rias then asked Issei to show the magic he had used earlier in the church up close. Issei agreed, placing his hands before him and centering himself as he silently chanted an aria to steady any lingering effects of the curse. He drew on the natural energy in the air. Flames manifested and formed into gloves around his hands. The gloves were deep crimson with a flame-like design rising to meet in an X at the base. A green jewel with the Roman numeral 3 was set on the backs of the gloves, and a silver ring marked the index finger of his right hand. More than the gloves, everyone noticed his eyes glowing a soft orange and radiating power. They instinctively shivered at the sight. Issei let the flames fade and his eyes returned to their usual brown. The group felt a mix of disappointment and relief as things returned to normal. Kaneko identified the technique as a branch of the sage arts. Akino watched with interest. Issei explained that the method drew natural energy from the air and absorbed it into his body, mixing it with his own life force. It heightened his awareness and made sensing easier. When Kaneko asked about negative effects, Issei said that he did not lose himself because Draig regulated the energy inside him and that he had learned only enough to use it safely. Kaneko nodded slowly, still studying him with narrowed eyes. Issei trained with Akino, who instructed both him and Asia in channeling demonic energy. Akino explained that Asia needed to gather energy from her body's aura, concentrate it, and feel it within. Asia proved talented. A green glow coated her hands and a seed in a small pot sprouted rapidly under her control. In contrast, Issei's seed remained a seed. Akino corrected Issei, noting that he also needed to visualize as he directed his power. Issei sighed at his own lack of progress. It was only the second day of their training trip and he was already struggling. Issei had never had much aptitude for mystical arts. Even as a child, his small pool of magical energy limited him, and most exercises focused on the more physical side of his role. His awakened form relied on harnessing the energy around and inside him using a technique that channeled external force, with magic serving mainly to guide it. His other ability had earned him mixed reactions from others, but it was not something he relied on for training. Akino had had high hopes after his display the previous day. She and the other devils had peppered him with questions about his awakened form, its strengths, weaknesses, and effects, and that curiosity had placed expectations on him that he felt he did not deserve. Akino expressed her disappointment gently, and Issei apologized, explaining that he had no natural talent for most kinds of magic and that his awakened form was essentially all he had. Her disappointment stabbed at him, and he found himself thinking back to a childhood he had never wanted. He remembered a dark, cramped room with a single narrow window and a tattered blanket, and the small boy inside it who stared up at the thin light wondering what else existed beyond those walls. That memory was broken by the sudden slam of a door as a masked figure entered and commanded him to come. Instincts drilled into him by training took over. He followed the man out into a courtyard where dozens of grown men had gathered, all armed. A man beside him wordlessly handed him a dagger that looked like a short sword against his small frame. He was told simply to do what he had been taught. He moved into the crowd with a calm expression, the boosted gear appearing on his arm. The confrontation that followed unfolded like a stylized fight scene, fast, precise, and unbloody, a flurry of strikes and evasions in choreographed motion that emphasized speed and technique rather than injury. He did not feel fear. This was a part of him he had been shaped for. In the present, Issei walked to a clearing in the forest near the villa. He had asked Rias for a quiet spot to train alone. He sat against a tree and closed his eyes, breathing slowly. As he settled, natural energy flowed into him, reaching his core. He extended his senses outward and felt the life around him, the trees, the insects, the flutter of birds and the gentle sound of a nearby pond. Then he noticed someone approaching. Kaneko stepped into the clearing and froze when she saw his open eyes. Issei greeted her with a smile and asked why she was here instead of training with the president and the others. Kaneko hesitated, then bowed and requested that he teach her how to use nature energy. Issei hesitated, saying that he had not fully mastered it himself. Her expression fell, and seeing her usually impassive face become sad made him change his mind. He agreed to teach her. Her small, grateful smile made the decision worthwhile. It was the 7th night of their trip. Days passed with steady routines. Issei practicing magic with Asia and Akino, failing more often than not and worried his efforts might be futile, sparring with Kiba, who pushed him through sword drills despite Issei's preference for spears, and long conversations with Rias. Asia improved by leaps and bounds, soon mastering fire, water, and even lightning. Rias admired her quick progress and called her a natural. Kiba became faster and more tireless through brutal training that involved tying stones to his feet to build speed and endurance. Rias and Akino trained themselves as well, sparring both physically and magically, experimenting with the power of destruction and lightning. Rias worked on making her magic respond to her will and take combat-ready shapes, while Akino focused on infusing strikes with elemental magic like ice and fire. If they mastered those techniques, the result would be spectacular. Kaneko, Issei's student, learned quickly and followed his instructions faithfully, but Issei sensed she was holding something back. She had talent, yet something kept her from reaching her full potential. Those thoughts were for the morning. For now, Issei needed rest. He rose from his bed in the room he shared with Kiba and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As he left the kitchen, he found Rias sitting on the living room windowsill in a simple nightgown. She looked up and noticed him. Rias asked if he was still awake and invited him to sit with her because she wanted to talk. Issei obliged, taking a chair and turning to face her. He then noticed she was wearing glasses and wondered aloud why a devil needed them. Rias reached up to her eyepiece and explained that the glasses were mostly for style and helped her think more clearly. She waved to a small stack of books beside her and said they contained information about the Phoenix clan. Rias described the ancient legend of the Phoenix as a creature associated with life, whose tears were said to heal and whose blood was rumored to grant longevity. Then she clarified that there was a demon clan called Phoenix, a powerful family often linked in human lore with the mythical bird. Issei recalled reading about the clan in the Book of Goetia and identified the Phoenix as the Great Marquis of Hell, a being who once commanded legions of demons. Rias expressed surprise at his knowledge, and Issei admitted he had read the text some time ago. Rias affirmed his understanding and added that the Phoenix family carried the essence of the Phoenix within them, granting mastery over fire. Their flames were said to be devastating and capable of harming even a person's spirit. The greater concern, Rias explained, was their apparent immortality. Phoenix members seemed able to regenerate from severe damage. Issei reflected on his own battles and insisted that no enemy was truly invincible. From humans to gods, every being had a weakness. It was a matter of finding it and exploiting it. Rias listened, clearly impressed by how Issei's insights continued to surprise her. She shifted the conversation to the clan's record in the raiding games, noting that a particular Phoenix had an impressive 8-2 record. Rias mentioned that the 2 losses had been intentionally handed over as favors to allied households, and she confessed to feeling uneasy about becoming engaged to Riser. She believed her parents had chosen him deliberately, perhaps to remove any chance she might have in a raiding game, leaving her little choice but marriage. The arrangement felt cruel. Rias explained how the Phoenix clan rose to prominence when the raiding games were introduced, devils who rarely fought each other. Suddenly understood how fearsome Phoenix powers truly were, and their status climbed quickly. Issei asked why Rias seemed so opposed to marriage and why she hated the idea so strongly. Rias responded that it was not hatred for the institution itself but a conflict tied to her identity. She revealed that she was a Gremory and the heir of her clan, which meant she would always be seen as the title she carried. Rias clarified that she did not dislike being a Gremory, she was proud of the name. Her problem was how others perceived her. Most people saw only Rias of the Gremory clan. and she did not want to be defined solely by her family or position. That desire to be seen as Rias the person, rather than as an heir or a symbol of her clan, was the reason she had come to the human world in the first place. In the human world, she could be treated as an individual. In the underworld, she never felt that way. She feared that marrying Riser would cost her the autonomy she treasured and prevent her from living as her own person. Rias drew her knees up and looked distant, expressing a wish to be with someone who would see and value her for who she truly was, not for her family, her title, or her fame. Rias confessed that her greatest dream was to be loved for who she was, not simply as a Gremory or as Rias of Gremory, and that Riser did not see her as her own person. Issei considered her words for a moment and then, honestly, explained why he was there. He told her that he was fighting for her because he had seen her in the club room looking frustrated and wanted to help. He wanted to give her the chance to live fully, to be with whoever she chose, to enjoy life and smile without worrying about her future. He admitted he knew little about the underworld or its hierarchy but only wanted to help her achieve her dreams. He spoke on, unaware of the way she watched him with wonder. He added that he liked Bucho simply as herself and only wanted her to be true to who she was. He smiled and scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. When he noticed her flaming red cheeks, he flailed his arms and apologized awkwardly, blaming his uneven experience with normal social interaction. Rias shook her head, her hair bouncing around, and Issei promised that he would do his best to make sure she did not end up married to someone unworthy. He gave his word, his awkwardness slipping away as his eyes glowed a faint orange. Rias rose from the windowsill and crossed the room. She embraced her pawn, happiness evident in her posture, and thanked Issei for his support. Issei stood in front of Kaneko, who sat cross-legged in the same clearing they had used the day before. It seemed that Kaneko had taken his earlier request to heart and was waiting for him to begin. Issei asked whether she was a Nikomata, and Kaneko nodded hesitantly. He moved on, not yet noticing the conflict in his junior. He asked if she had ever received formal training in senjutsu, and she shook her head. He explained that to use senjutsu one must gather natural energy and properly blend it with one's own life force, then asked if she could do that. Kaneko closed her eyes and concentrated. Issei felt her draw in natural energy, becoming quietly attuned to the environment, the soft rustle of leaves and the steady trickle of the nearby pond. After a few minutes, he told her to stop. Kaneko opened her eyes and looked at him quizzically. Issei said that it should be enough and produced a small mirror, placing it before her. In her concentration, she had not noticed the subtle change. Though still wearing her Kuo Academy uniform, she had entered her Yukai form, a pair of white cat ears, matching tails, and eyes that were distinctly feline marked her as a Nikomata. Issei noted the change with professional calm. He called her to come closer, and she walked toward him, puzzled. He asked if she knew how to use Tuki and explained its basic principle, using one's life aura to envelop the body to increase strength, speed, and defense. He admitted that he himself had never mastered it, having relied on a different method to compensate for his limitations. Kaneko shook her head in response. Issei observed that Tuki was hard to teach because it was instinctual, but being a Nikomata made Kaneko unusually receptive to nature. He only needed to awaken the instinct within her. He warned that the training would be difficult and asked if she was sure. Kaneko nodded with resolute determination. Later, Issei gently placed Kaneko on her bed. The day had exhausted her. He reflected that using Tuki required interacting with one's life force through precise energy manipulation, not an easy task, but Kaneko's willingness to learn and her Yukai nature gave him confidence that she could master it in time for the raiding game. As he turned to leave, Kaneko grabbed his sleeve. He looked back to find her curled up like a sleeping cat, murmuring her sister's name in her dream. He gently eased her grip, adjusted her position so her head rested comfortably on the pillow, and tucked the blanket around her. He whispered a soft goodnight and left the room. On the 10th day of the training trip, Issei sat alone in his room, staring at the gauntlet on his hand, the green jewel behind it and the Roman numeral 3 displayed in the center. He ordered Drake to remove the first seal. A small mark vanished from the gauntlet, leaving a 2. He inhaled, gathered natural energy, and entered his awakened mode. A brief, sharp sensation moved through his chest, unpleasant but not painful. He sighed and dismissed the forms. Drake reminded him that unsealing the boosted gear was risky and asked why he had done so when he had previously promised not to use it. Issei answered that their opponent was a phoenix and that even he could lose to an immortal, so he had prepared accordingly. Drake noted that Issei was always prepared, and Issei wryly acknowledged that preparation had kept him alive so far. A knock sounded at the door. Kaneko called to ask if he was there. Issei replied that he was and hurried to open it. Kaneko announced that she had completed all the exercises. Issei expressed surprise at how quickly she had finished. She asked him to watch, then took a stance. Gradually, a green glow gathered around her as her aura focused into her body, covering her completely. She asked if it looked okay. Issei thought it was not perfect and suspected some internal limitation was holding her back, though he could not be certain. Still, he acknowledged that it was a strong first attempt compared to his own early efforts. He patted her on the head, and Kaneko appeared quietly content with his approval. On the 14th day, everyone was at their respective homes. Rias had given them the final day off to make sure they were well rested. At 10 o'clock at night, Issei lay down on his bed. The raiding game was set to start at midnight. Rias had asked her peerage to meet in the clubroom at 11:30 p.m. and had requested that they wear the Kuo Academy uniform, explaining that they were members of the Occult Research Club after all. A knock sounded at the door. Issei turned to see Asia open it timidly, wearing the outfit he had first seen her in, the nun's habit without the rosary and veil. Asia gestured to herself and explained that Rias had told her to wear whatever made her comfortable, so she had immediately chosen that. She acknowledged that even though she was a devil now, she still respected her beliefs. Issei reassured her that the outfit looked good and told her not to worry. Asia stepped forward and sat beside him on the bed, leaning her head on his shoulder. She confessed that she was scared, and Issei held her close and said he would protect her. Asia relaxed and asked to stay that way until they had to leave. Seeing her hopeful expression, Issei smiled and agreed. Nearly 10 minutes to midnight, the whole club gathered in the old school building. Kiba leaned against a wall, inspecting his swords and wearing gauntlets and shin guards. Kaneko sat on the couch reading a book, wearing fingerless gloves that suggested training and the ability to channel energy. Aquino and Rias sat cross-legged, calmly sipping tea prepared by Rias. Asia fidgeted slightly in front of them. Issei stared at his hand, the Roman numeral 2 on the back of his gloves shining. A magic circle appeared and Grafia, the maid, stepped through. She announced that the match was about to begin and asked if they were ready. After everyone affirmed, she explained the details of the raiding game. When the match began, they would be transported by magic into another dimension created specifically for raiding games. Issei wondered how strong devils must be to create such a place. Grafia continued that the two households, the Gremory clan and the Phoenix clan, would be watching the match along with some close allies. Issei tensed. He was not used to fighting with observers and he knew there would be many. Grafia added that the Demon King would also be watching. Issei reacted with surprise upon learning that Rias's older brother would be observing. Kiba confirmed that Rias's brother was Surzex Gremory, the Crimson Satan, the strongest devil of his generation and one of the leaders in the underworld. Issei mentally complained about the timing of such a revelation right before an important fight. Grafia announced that it was time and instructed everyone to gather in the circle. They nodded and followed her direction. In moments, light enveloped them and transported them to the battlefield. Issei closed his eyes and called to Drake, asking if the dragon was ready. Drake responded that he was as ready as ever. Issei opened his eyes to find them glowing with power and prepared to begin. When the light faded, Issei realized they were back in the clubroom. He scanned the window and saw the rest of the school outside, but the sky was bright like daylight instead of the midnight it should have been. He wondered why the other side had chosen a battlefield that resembled home and suspected it was meant to give someone an advantage. Rias made a sound of annoyance and Rias commented that this felt like something her opponent would do, creating an advantage to show she could still win. She vowed to deny him that satisfaction and to ensure they won the game. The others voiced their approval. Grafia introduced herself as a maid from the House of Gremory and the arbiter of the match between Rias Gremory and Riser Phoenix. She explained that, in the name of her master Surzex Lucifer, she would observe the match. With the consent of both Riser and Rias, they had created this battlefield, Hyoudou Academy, the school Rias attended in the human world. Issei noted that the field advantage stemmed from Riser's arrogance, which might work in their favor. Grafia described the starting positions. Rias's base was the occult research clubroom in the old school building, while Riser's base was the student council room in the new school building. If a pawn promoted, it should proceed to the opposing side's location. Rias observed that they first had to deal with the pawns, because letting them promote to queens would be disastrous. Issei agreed. To siege a castle, one must remove fortifications, supplies, and reinforcements, and their priority was to prevent any pawns from promoting into queens. He said he had a plan to handle them, and Rias expressed interest in hearing it. That was the start of the raiding game. Hyoudou Academy stood apart from most Japanese schools. The main building featured large glass windows and Greek-style pillars at the entrance. The old school building matched that style except for the lack of pillars. The gymnasium at the center was vast, designed to hold the entire student population for school events. The school grounds were ringed by a dense forest, with only a few cobbled paths winding between buildings. In the branches of one of those trees, a few hundred feet from the old school building, Issei crouched, waiting for the pawns he expected to approach along the path. He reasoned that Riser's team did not know the field as well as Rias did, so they would likely take the most straightforward route rather than move through the forest where traps would be easier to employ. That assumption did not guarantee their choice of route, and he acknowledged it rested on several guesses. Issei also expected that someone like Riser, arrogant and condescending, would create opportunities to crush hope and spirit rather than win cleanly. The replicated battlefield confirmed that Riser favored overwhelming domination. A tense minute passed before the sound of shoes against pavement broke the silence. Issei looked down and saw 3 of Riser's pawns walking slowly toward the school building, unaware of his presence. Issei smiled, thinking that made things easier. When the 3 were directly below him, Issei dropped from the tree and landed in their formation. The sudden presence of a single combatant among them, even one who could occupy 8 pawn pieces, stunned them into hesitation. One pawn, wearing an unusual outfit, reacted first and began to form a casting circle. Issei ducked beneath her arm, moved behind her, and delivered a precise strike to the base of her skull. She collapsed, stunned. The other 2, dressed alike, did not yield. With simultaneous cries they rushed Issei, but he sidestepped, bringing the nearest to the ground and incapacitating her with a quick move. The remaining pawn became even more agitated and summoned a large magical circle around herself before unleashing a torrent of fire toward Issei. He met the attack and used his abilities to freeze and shatter the flames. The last pawn stood stunned, eyes wide at his control. With a single maneuver, Issei removed the last of the 3 from the fight. The announcer declared that 3 of Riser's pawns had retired. Issei frowned, looking at the spot where his opponents had stood. He could have defeated them the moment he dropped down, but he had held back to gauge their capabilities. He was not impressed. It had been far too easy. Still, removing 3 of Riser's team from the battle was advantageous. An explosion and a flash of light cut through Issei's thoughts. He looked up to see a fading magical circle in the air above the smoking ruins of the gymnasium. The attack was intended to deny the middle ground and make travel between the 2 sides more perilous. Another explosion reverberated across the battlefield, and the announcer reported that 2 more of Riser's pawns, a knight and a rook, had retired. Issei set his destination in mind and charged toward the school grounds, moving closer to the heart of the main building, the base of Riser Phoenix. Kiba ducked under the blow meant to cleave off his head, pushing off the ground to gain distance and time to think. The assault on the gym had gone smoothly. Kaneko and he had beaten down 2 pawns, a knight and a rook. At first Kiba had been worried about his junior, afraid she could not handle 3 opponents at once. Then he saw the golden light that covered her. Within minutes she incapacitated all 3 of them before Kiba had even finished his opponent, who called herself Cirrus. He could only shake his head, amazed at how much the rook had improved. The two of them walked away from the gym, leaving the four inside the building confused. That was when lightning struck the gym and the peerage members inside it. Kiba and Kaneko, still buzzing from the fight, had become complacent and paid for it. Kiba barely managed to get out of the blast radius thanks to the speed granted by the night piece inside him. Kaneko, a rook and caught off guard and out of her Tuki form, was not so lucky and sustained some serious injuries. They were preparing to fight Yubaluna, the queen of Riser, when Akino appeared. Akino and Yubaluna began fighting mid-flight, the air filling with the sparks of their magic. Kiba and Kaneko used the distraction to move closer to Riser's base. Now Kiba found himself crossing blades with Carloman, the other knight of the Phoenix. He watched his opponent carefully, his wary eyes tracking every movement. The sound of Kaneko getting hit by one of her three opponents made Kiba grit his teeth. He moved instinctively to her side, but the knight intercepted him, locking blades and smirking. They rushed at each other, Kiba wielding his longsword and Carloman her Zweihander. Between rapid exchanges powered by the knight pieces, Kiba saw from the corner of his eye that Kaneko had recovered and was fighting back, Tuki once again covering her body. Carloman acknowledged that Kiba was skilled as the Knight of Gremory, and then aimed a sword at his neck that he barely managed to block. Kiba replied that he appreciated the compliment and asked if she could move aside so he could help someone in need. Carloman said she would not, and their blades clashed again in a shower of sparks. The game announcer declared the retirement of Riser-sama's rook and Ria-sama's rook. Kiba's attention snapped toward Kaneko and he saw her body beginning to fade into light. Beside her, the two pawns panted from exhaustion but grinned in victory. Ravel, her voice high and composed, ordered Carloman to finish the opponent, noting that Ni and Li had already defeated theirs. She appeared as a young girl with long blonde hair tied in twin ponytails and a dress that gave her a bird-like appearance, which matched her fiery wings. Someone in a kimono sat beside her and never left her side during the whole battle. Carloman remarked that knights were troublesome with their honor, then faced Kiba resolutely while her two ally pawns encircled Ria's only knight. With a deft gesture, the three of them were engulfed in flames. Carloman said the fight had been good but insisted she must finish it quickly and promised a proper duel once they won the match. Kiba began to back away to avoid being surrounded and created another blade, the Flame Delete, raising it to mitigate the approaching fire. Then the announcer declared that Riser-sama's queen had retired. Everyone in the area reacted with surprise as Riser's peerage temporarily lost control of their powers. Kiba smiled, and the members of Riser's team remained wide-eyed and stunned. Ravel was the first to regain composure and snapped at her team to take down the knight immediately. She planned to question Yubaluna later. The two pawns and the knight obeyed, wrapping themselves in flame. Kiba raised his newly formed sword and absorbed the flames into it. Riser's peerage reacted with shock and demanded to know what he had done. Kiba explained that his sword devoured flames and tried to sound confident, though he knew his claim was exaggerated. He could absorb ordinary flames, but the power of a phoenix would be beyond him. His bluff seemed to give his opponents pause. Ravel scolded them for being cautious over a bluff and encouraged the pawns to press forward. The two pawns advanced, emboldened, while the knight prepared patiently. Kiba readied himself, determined to take down as many of them as he could. The announcer then declared the retirement of Riser-sama's knight. Ravel pointed an accusing finger at the source of the sudden attack, and Kiba turned to see the unconscious knight at his feet. Issei counted the remaining pieces and noted 2 bishops, 2 pawns and a knight, then glanced at the body fading into light beneath him and amended his count, crossing the knight off the list. Issei looked up and met the steady, curious gaze of the other bishop on the field. He ignored her briefly and turned to Kiba, his eyes falling to Kiba's side. Issei observed that Kiba was hurt and asked what had happened. Kiba looked surprised and admitted that he had not noticed the injury. He touched his side where a long wound had opened but downplayed it, saying the rush of battle had kept him from feeling it much. Issei nodded and remarked on how adrenaline could mask pain during a fight, then hesitated when Kiba asked if this was the right moment for a lesson. Issei checked the 4 opponents across the battlefield, gathering chakra and feeling the familiar warmth of the flames within. He asked Kiba if he minded him joining the fight, explaining he wanted revenge on those who had taken out Kaneko. Kiba agreed and explained that the pawns and a rook had been responsible, but that Kaneko had managed to take the rook down herself. He spoke with genuine awe at how much she had improved in a week. Issei answered proudly that she had improved a great deal. Before Kiba could continue, Ravel finally lost patience and erupted with anger, her voice sharp and her magic flaring with waves of fire and gusting wind. Issei attempted to calm her with a casual greeting, but she snapped that she had not seen him in 2 years and could not believe his first word was merely a hello. Kiba, puzzled, asked Issei what she meant, and Issei murmured that it was complicated before asking Ravel what she was referring to. Ravel demanded whether he had already forgotten her after all he had done, her tone soft at first before hardening with resolve. She declared her name as Ravel of the Phoenix clan, daughter of fire and wind, and warned that she would make him remember. She pointed at him and sent a surge of fire charging toward him. Issei raised his hands and, to the astonishment of everyone present, absorbed the flames, which seemed to vanish into thin air. Ravel's confident expression faltered. Issei asked Kiba to hold on a few minutes while he handled the situation, and Kiba asked where their senior Akino was. Issei said she was with the president in Asia, helping them against Riser. Issei advanced toward the stunned Phoenix and then broke into a run. The woman beside Ravel, a fellow bishop with black hair in a purple kimono, pushed Ravel behind her and told the young lady to get behind her, attempting to shield Ravel from an approaching pawn. The paper-thin defense was no match. Issei closed the distance in seconds, sidestepping the bishop's defensive magic. When she attempted to strike, he moved with precise speed, delivering 2 non-lethal blows that caused the woman to collapse instantly, rendered unconscious. Issei noted Ravel's expression as her fellow bishop fell so easily. Ravel tried to bring her hand up to attack, but Issei seized her arm and stopped her. He said he would explain everything later and, with a quick, deft movement, rendered the wide-eyed Phoenix unconscious like the others. The defeated opponents began to fade away. Issei commented that the outcome had been rather anticlimactic as the bodies in his arms faded into white light and were sent to the medical ward below. He observed that Kiba was also finishing his own fights. With a final technique, Kiba put his blue-haired opponent down decisively. Kiba then asked Issei how he knew the girl. Issei admitted that it was a long story. Kiba shook his head with a bemused expression and told Issei that he was an interesting person and that Kiba felt lucky to have met him. Issei mentioned that he was attracted to girls. Kiba responded earnestly that when he cared for someone, their gender did not matter and he would love them all the same. Issei reacted with a puzzled sound. An announcement interrupted them, drawing their attention to the top of the main school building where pillars of fire and blasts of dark energy were erupting. The 2 friends exchanged a quick look and sprinted toward the roof at top speed, determined to help their president. Rias panted, glaring angrily at Riser Phoenix. They had been sparring on the rooftop for half an hour. Akino had arrived to back her up 15 minutes earlier, and Riser's Queen Ubeluna had appeared at the same time. They had been trading powerful spells, flames, lightning, explosives, and spheres of destructive energy. Ironically, Riser had lost his queen when she reached for her phoenix tears, leaving her exposed long enough for Rias to summon a circle beneath her and blast her away, neutralizing her for the moment. Rias and Akino had poured everything into the fight, using creative combinations of magic, but Riser proved why the Phoenix name fit them, displaying a resilience that seemed almost immortal. Akino had faltered when, in a burst of anger after a fireball nearly struck Asia, she had charged too eagerly. Riser had dodged and used his wings of flame to envelop her in a blazing sphere, temporarily incapacitating her. Now Rias stood exhausted but not defeated. Riser looked ragged, breathing hard, hair unkempt, sweat on his face, and he looked furious. He declared the whole thing madness and argued that everyone had already foreseen the outcome, suggesting Rias should give up and marry him, delivering the words with an arrogant grin. Even so, inside Riser there was a hint of doubt. He had expected an easy victory, win the match, defeat Rias's peerage, and then take her and his opponents as spoils, securing status in the devil community. What he had not expected was an opponent who absorbed nearly every blow he sent, who kept most of her pieces until deep into the match, and who could fight him to a standstill despite her lack of official experience. Rias's anger flared at his words. She snapped that she would not give up and reminded him that she was still in the game, pointing out how few pieces he had left and how exhausted he was. Asia, standing nearby, trembled with fear at the looming phoenix. Riser's nerves frayed. He conjured a massive fireball above his head, the heat already radiating outward, and announced that he would end the match immediately and force a surrender. He hurled the enormous sphere toward Rias, the rooftop tiles beginning to soften under its passing heat. Rias swore under her breath, calculating options. The fireball was too large to dodge without leaving Asia behind. Carrying Asia would be too slow. Countering it with her own power might leave her exhausted afterward. Gritting her teeth, Rias sprinted for her only bishop in the game and hoped for a miracle. Her hope arrived when warm arms closed around her, pulling her into a protective embrace and carrying her out of the path of the fireball. When she looked up, she saw bright orange eyes looking down with a playful smile. Issei appeared and said he hoped he was not interrupting. Rias, surprised and breathless, stammered in recognition that it was Issei. Issei set Rias down after checking that she was all right. He turned to Kiba and saw the knight setting Asia down. Kiba greeted Rias with a casual smile, eyes amused. Rias nodded and turned toward Riser, who stood like a storm made flesh. The winds around him picked up and his fiery wings danced wildly. He looked disheveled compared to his composure in the clubroom, clothes rumpled, hair messy, breathing a little heavy. Without warning, Riser surged forward in a whirlwind of fire and wind. Rias moved as if to intervene, but Issei gently held her back and assured her that she had done more than enough, asking her to trust her pawn to handle the rest. Issei then focused on the approaching tempest. He invoked the war cry unburnt, unbent, unbroken, and fire flared from his gauntlets to meet Riser's flames, forming a column of light that shot toward the sky. Riser forced his way through the pillar, the flames trailing at his command. Issei caught Riser's fist and used the momentum to fling him back. Seizing the opening, Issei launched himself at Riser. Caught off guard, Riser was overwhelmed by a rapid series of strikes that left him scrambling. He retaliated by striking with his wings from above, forcing Issei to pull back. Riser then took to the air, buying himself time. From above, Riser flaunted the advantage and taunted Issei, proclaiming that as a phoenix he was the hunter in the air. Issei remained calm and aimed both palms at the ground. Power gathered, and a sudden blast of fire propelled him straight up, closing the distance to the surprised phoenix. Riser only narrowly avoided a decisive kick to the throat. Issei landed on Riser's back and seized his wings, ignoring the heat as he focused. In a flash of opposing element, he encased the bases of those fiery wings in ice, immobilizing the appendages. He then forced Riser down, and the phoenix crashed back to the ground with a hard impact that left a deep scorch in the earth. The flames in Issei's hands faded as he settled to the ground, watching Riser intently. Riser struggled to stand and, after a moment, asked Issei why he would fight for Rias. He pointed out that Issei had only recently met her, that he had been an ordinary human with no obligations to bind him, and wondered why Issei would willingly take on the role of someone else's pawn to face an immortal like Riser. Issei looked down at him and answered that he wanted to help Rias and give her the freedom she deserved. He said that he wanted her to be able to speak her mind and love who she chose. He acknowledged that it sounded cheesy but insisted that Rias was a good person and that she was his master now, and he would follow her orders. Unknown to Issei, Rias had come down to the grounds and had been listening to their exchange. Rias put her hands to her chest and, cheeks flushed, told Issei that he was trying to make her fall for him. Rias suddenly turned toward the rooftop where she had left two members of her peerage, expecting to see them there. Instead, she saw a young girl approaching from the opposite direction. The girl had blue hair tied into 4 ponytails and wore a white haori with a red sash and a red coat. She carried a wooden staff, which she pointed in Rias's direction as she quickly closed the distance. A brief, neutral beat bridged the change in focus. A system announcement declared that Rias's knight and bishop had retired. Issei snapped to attention, berating himself for the momentary lapse. He should have known better. He was a warrior, not a novice. Never drop your guard on a battlefield, where everything can change in an instant. He searched for his king and saw the blue-haired girl rushing toward Rias. He cursed and sprinted, pushing his speed to the limit. He watched Rias raise her arms and summon her signature black and crimson magic. It surged toward the pawn, but the pawn ducked beneath it with a speed and grace that felt wrong for such a piece. That motion bought Issei just enough time to reach Rias's side. Issei asked if President Rias was all right, his eyes flicking between the two remaining opponents. Riser laughed and praised Mira, telling her that she had done well and that he would reward her later for her promotion to queen. Mira blushed under his praise and thanked him, saying she did her best to make him pleased. Issei tightened his stance and fell back to form a triangle, keeping Rias protected behind him. Riser gestured at Mira and they each formed magical circles. Issei felt the enormous concentration of magic within them far more than he could safely absorb. Turning it into ice risked provoking a release of fire he could not contain, and he refused to gamble Rias's future. He made the choice to meet the attack instead. The two phoenixes unleashed their magic, and twin 20-foot waves of fire rushed toward Issei and his king. Issei commanded Drag to unseal. The seal released, boosting a sudden surge of power into an explosive counter. He moved his palms forward and met the assault head-on. The flames collided, forming a towering pillar. Riser had intended it to be a spectacle of dominance, but the collision produced a dense smoke screen. When the smoke cleared, the battlefield within a 20-foot radius had become a field of ice. Frost coated everything, and the very air felt sharp and cold. Riser and Mira felt the bite of the wind. In the center, arms still outstretched, Issei stood calm. The jewels on the backs of his gloves, once marked with 3, now showed 2. A controlled, otherworldly flame lingered across his forehead and hands, fire in appearance, but clearly governed by his will and not consuming anything it did not command. Riser felt an uneasy chill at the sight. Mira regarded Issei warily. Then, a subtle motion, a short shift of the legs, a small twitch of the arms triggered the system to acknowledge the pawn's withdrawal. The match was decided. Riser thought that whatever Issei had done was remarkably effective. Issei's gaze fixed on him with a power that made Riser feel oddly diminished. Riser noted the beauty and purity of those flames and admitted inwardly that they were among the most magnificent he had seen, a fire capable of challenging the phoenix. Undeterred, Riser summoned his own fire into wings that reached skyward. A small, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face as he ran toward Issei, accepting the inevitability of the clash. Riser invoked his technique, calling forth the dragon flame. Issei sighed and let his arms fall to his sides. He stared at the empty space where Riser had stood. Rias breathed his name from behind him. He turned and smiled at his master, intending to call her by her title, but he was interrupted by a bright light that surrounded them both. When it faded, they found themselves in a large room. Grafia, the maid, waited there along with 2 red-haired men who shared a strong resemblance to Rias. Rias's father burst into words about how frightening the recent events had been and how worried he had been, and then he flung himself into a relieved, clumsy embrace that left Rias squirming and blushing as she protested. After a few minutes they separated, and the older of the 2 redheads took a more composed tone as he praised Rias for coming into her own. Surzex, who Issei recognized as one of the 4 great Satans of the underworld, laughed and teased his sister with affectionate disbelief. Grafia, the calm presence in the room, scolded Surzex for being undignified and tugged him gently by the ear until he complained. Issei found the family scene at odds with his expectations of devils. He had imagined something more fearsome, but what he saw was domestic and surprisingly ordinary. Surzex redirected the conversation and suggested that Rias would want to see her peerage members. Rias glanced at Issei and nodded quickly, eager to leave the embarrassing moment behind. Grafia opened the door, and a shout echoed down the hallway. A small red blur barreled through the doorway and leapt into Issei's arms, nearly knocking him over. Issei grunted as he adjusted his grip on the eager child, and when his vision cleared he found a smiling boy with short red hair and matching eyes pressed against him. The boy wore a white shirt with thin black stripes, a dark gray blazer, and a long black overcoat with a high collar and a red ribbon. Issei realized he recognized the child from years earlier. The boy addressed Issei as if he were an older brother. The boy's affectionate misidentification brightened his innocent face even more as he rubbed his head against Issei's stomach. Graphia asked if the child knew Issei, and the boy confirmed with straightforward pride that Issei was the person he considered his older brother. Issei awkwardly corrected him, giving his full name, Hyoudou Issei, and laughed when Surzex teased the child for forgetting to introduce himself properly. The child bowed with polite formality and introduced himself as Milika's Gremory, which surprised Issei when Graphia and Surzex were identified as his parents and relatives. Issei processed the revelation. The cheerful boy he had known was not only related to his new master but also the child of Surzex. He noted the family resemblance, crimson hair and the similar features, and allowed himself a wry thought about how he should have made the connection sooner. Surzex praised Issei for his relaxed demeanor toward the powerful, while Issei returned the compliment with a self-deprecating grin about how casual conversations sometimes worked better than flattery. Rias reminded everyone that they were going to the hospital to see their injured friends, and Issei rubbed the back of his head, embarrassed at getting sidetracked. Milikas immediately offered to show them the way and took Issei's hand, leading him confidently through unfamiliar corridors toward the hospital where Rias's peerage members were receiving care. Graphia checked Issei over with discreet concern and then led her pouting son away to attend to other matters, promising that he could spend time with Issei later. As they walked, Surzex laughed softly and teased Rias about how deeply she had fallen for someone so quickly, his amusement clear in his expressive features. Rias, cheeks flushed, turned away from her brother but remained determined to see the others and support her team. Issei sighed, wistful about youth. Rias stammered that it was not like that at all and called him big brother, explaining that someone had helped her out of a tight spot and she owed him. Issei teased that this must be what people called the shy and flustered type and admitted he had never imagined his little sister could be so endearing. Rias stamped her foot at her brother, then realized he was only teasing. With an annoyed huff she turned and followed Issei toward the hospital. Surzex, amused by the exchange, followed his father, who had decided to meet the head of the Phoenix clan to smooth relations between the two families. Riser's king had retired. Rias Gremory was the winner. Issei stepped into the room a little behind Rias. The ward had been large enough for 10 hospital beds, 5 on each side, with room for a dozen people to move around comfortably. 4 of those beds were occupied by members of Rias's peerage. Kiba and Kaneko rested on the left side with Kaneko closest to the door. On the right were Akino and Asia, and Rias herself lay farther down the row in her role as queen. When Rias entered the room and Issei followed, still holding Milika's hand, everyone immediately sat up and voiced their relief at seeing their president alive. Rias raised a hand and asked them not to get up. She told them that they had been hurt on her account and that they deserved to rest. Her calm words eased them back into their beds. Kiba asked what had happened and admitted that he had only just woken up, angry with himself for letting his guard down. Asia kept her eyes lowered and confessed that, despite Rias's instructions to stay close, she had been taken out of the fight and felt guilty for leaving Rias and Issei alone. Rias smiled and stepped forward to hug Asia, telling her she had done nothing wrong and that simply having them there, willing to fight for her, was one of the greatest comforts she could know. The others relaxed and smiled, thankful for the reassurance. Then Kiba remembered something from the battlefield and asked Issei about a girl named Ravel who had seemed to know him. Everyone turned to look at Issei. Issei tried to appear casual and said he might mention it later, but Rias and the others pressed him for details. Akino reminded everyone that Ravel had even called him Haruka back in the clubroom, and she asked what that had meant. Issei tried to change the subject by asking Kaneko how her first use of senjutsu in combat had gone and whether she was experiencing any side effects. The cat girl narrowed her eyes at him, suspicious, and Asia echoed that she would like to know as well. Rias admitted she was curious too and watched Issei fidget in the center of the room as he tried to find an explanation. Before he could say much, The door banged open and a loud voice announced that it was time for an explanation. Another girl protested that this might not be a wise move. Issei braced himself, feeling resigned but with a small smile as he faced the newcomer. Ravel entered with her blonde hair in twin drills and wearing her signature pink dress, looking much like the one he had encountered 2 years earlier. Ravel addressed him as Little Bird and pointed at him, clearly agitated and flushed. A companion stood with her Maihi, the other bishop he remembered who seemed recovered from whatever blow Issei had dealt her and stood untroubled. Ravel demanded an explanation and repeatedly pointed at Issei. Her companion watched with interest. Issei shifted awkwardly and muttered that it was complicated. He admitted that Ravel was not the first devil he had ever met. Rias reminded him that they'd already learned a little about that when he had first walked into the clubroom. Issei explained that 2 years ago, for reasons he did not care to elaborate, he had ended up in the underworld and met the Phoenix there. He said that things had happened, he had met her, and that was how they knew each other. Everyone leaned in, drawn by the rarity of Issei sharing anything about his life before they met him. Ravel's companion, Maihi, had her own curiosity about how someone would call Ravel Little Bird. Issei sighed and prepared to tell them his story, sinking into a memory as he began. A boy walked through the cobbled streets, peering through shop windows at their displays. The underworld was different from what he had expected. It had food stands and jewelry shops, even televisions selling mundane household goods. The screens showed what looked like magical girl programs. It felt more like the human world than any image he had held of the underworld. Drake, the voice in his head, remarked that the place was rather nice, and Issei hummed in response as he took in the sights. He stopped to inspect a toy in a window, a green plush with a tentacle beard, and sighed at the lack of coins in his pocket. Then he headed toward the outskirts where he had been told the artifact he sought might be found. Near the forest line, Issei heard a sharp cry for help. He thought the timing suspicious. In the middle of the underworld, at a place where few would see, a loud call for aid seemed like a trap. Drake teased that it was entertaining to watch him rush in regardless, and Issei told the dragon to be quiet. He could not ignore a plea for help, trap or no trap, and he ran toward the sound as it faded into the trees. A few hundred meters in, he came upon a clearing. A girl who looked no older than a child was being dragged by 3 hooded figures with masks. Nearby, a cart held other bound people who were unconscious. One person in particular stood out with different colored clothes and a sword slung across his back. The girl in the elaborate pink dress trembled with fear. One of the captors clamped a hand over the girl's mouth to silence her. He angrily muttered about the bother of kidnappings. The tallest among them said that devils fetched good money and that this girl was a phoenix, worth far more than an ordinary devil. Another of the kidnappers asked if they could expect payment for their work. Issei stalked forward, drawing on everything he had been taught. He slipped the knife from the waist of one of the men and announced his arrival. The tall man spun around and swung at him with surprising speed, aiming for a disabling blow. Issei sidestepped, grabbed the attacker's arm, and used the knife hilt to knock him senseless. The man collapsed. A shorter assailant rushed with a dagger, fury on his face. Issei stepped aside smoothly, trapped the attacker briefly, and executed a precise kick that unbalanced him. The man was sent tumbling and lay motionless, clearly incapacitated. After a quick check to ensure the men were only unconscious, Issei turned to the remaining leader. The last man had propped the terrified girl against a tree and watched the skirmish with a calculating air. He raised his hands to show he meant no immediate harm, but Issei kept his guard up. The leader explained that he intended to sell the girl. Devils, he said, commanded high prices, especially a phoenix. He then offered Issei a partnership, suggesting they could make a lot of money together given their respective skills. Issei refused immediately. Drake announced that he would beat Haruka, free the captive behind him, and be on his way. Haruka told Drake to leave him alone. He was busy. The taller man, unimpressed, decided that he would have to take Haruka out and moved without further preamble, drawing his sword and trying to finish the boy before he could react. Haruka underestimated how skilled his opponent truly was. He ducked under the blow and brought his small knife up toward the man's shoulder blades. Knife met sword in a clash of metal, neither yielded. When the taller man's sword overextended by a fraction, Haruka seized the opening and moved toward the shoulder. The opponent avoided the blow, the knife grazing him, and used the moment to swing his sword around toward Haruka's back. Haruka trusted his instincts and rolled forward, the blade whooshing overhead. His feet skidded in the dirt and left small grooves where he landed. Without hesitation, he launched himself back at the man. The taller fighter complimented Haruka on his skill, noting calmly that the boy handled himself far better than expected. He pushed on Haruka's knife and vaulted back a few feet. Then he spoke his name, explaining that pride as a warrior had driven him to fight. He introduced himself as John and bowed with such sincerity that Haruka seemed taken aback. John asked for Haruka's name, pointing out that it was rude to withhold it after introducing himself. Haruka stared off for a moment and finally gave his name, asking to be called Haruka. John acknowledged him and readied himself for another exchange. Haruka raised his dagger and charged. The two clashed in the clearing, and as they fought, thought faded and only instinct remained. Sparks flew where steel met steel, their movements quick and precise, like an animated duel out of a tale. They struck and parried in a relentless rhythm. During a brief, forceful skirmish where they pressed face to face, John noticed something in Haruka's eyes. A genuine grin, the kind of smile that comes from enjoying the fight itself. John was surprised. He had not felt that kind of thrill for a long time. The surprise loosened his grip for the slightest moment. Haruka used that moment, pushing the sword's tip into the ground to unbalance John and then delivering a quick kick that dropped John to his knees in the dirt. Haruka stepped in and shielded the sword from John's view, lifting his knife and asking John to yield out of courtesy, not expecting the offer to be taken seriously. John chuckled, lowered his mask and hood, and accepted. He removed his mask to reveal curly brown hair to his shoulders, a scar along his right cheek, and very dark gray eyes appraising Haruka. John called Haruka unique and, against all common sense, rose without backing away from the pointed blade. He announced that he would leave and walked away. Haruka objected at first and pointed to the bound girl who had watched their fight with wide eyes. John told Haruka to free her himself, reminding him that it was Haruka who had promised to do so. When Haruka protested that he could not simply be allowed to go, John explained that the encounter had made him think about what mattered to a man and that he needed time to collect his thoughts. He tossed his scabbard aside as a keepsake and disappeared over the horizon, asking only that Haruka remember their battle. Haruka shook his head, retrieved John's sword from the ground, sheathed it, and set it at his belt. He moved to the captive and removed her GG. She watched him with wide, frightened eyes. He examined the bindings on her hands and wrists, metal cuffs that covered from elbow to wrist, engraved with a black serpent devouring its own tail around a triangle with a sun at its center. The symbol was familiar to him. The Ouroboros suggested a connection to the Cows Brigade, and the thought of that affiliation made him tense. The girl shivered at his glare. He took a moment to ensure she was unharmed and then gently loosened her restraints. The metal was the kind that could suppress the magic contained within it, and from the feeling he got, it had been specially treated to be even more effective against a devil probably blessed or altered for that purpose. She thanked him in a meek voice and held out her hands, asking him to remove it. Haruka said he could and told her to hold still. He took his knife, slipped it under the leather straps, and drew the blade along their length to loosen them. He found it ironic that all the effort to keep her harmless had been undone so simply. He asked if she could walk as she rubbed her feet. She tried to stand but stumbled and was caught before she fell. She said she could not walk. Haruka turned, offered his back, and told her to hop on. The girl hesitated, then, a phoenix if the others had been right, clambered onto his back and wrapped her arms around his neck. Haruka admitted he did not know where to take her and asked where she was from. She mumbled that her family was staying in town at a hotel. 2 years earlier. They walked the pathways together, drawing odd looks as they went. Along the way Haruka listened while Ravel spoke about her family, her friends, her life, and what the underworld was like. After a couple of hours they reached a place near the center of the city. Ravel announced that this was it and reluctantly stepped down from Haruka's back. Haruka asked if she was sure, using the nickname Little Bird that he had given her when she had clung to a bird plushie. Ravel flushed at the name and, a little more confident with the stranger who had saved her, said she was absolutely sure. She crossed the threshold and moved through the lobby with a surprising grace despite her dirted clothes. At the middle of the lobby a flash of burgundy announced Ravel's family. Their mother rushed forward, nearly hysterical with relief at finding her daughter and demanding to know where she had been, while the three brothers looked plainly relieved. Reiser asked if Ravel was all right and what had happened. When everyone waited for an answer, Ravel explained that she had been kidnapped while walking down the street. Anger flared among her family. The room grew tense and a visible, heat-like aura shimmered as their outrage rose, causing some occupants to step away. Their mother demanded the kidnappers' names and vowed to make them answer for what they had done, her voice fierce. Ravel, the eldest, adopted a calmer tone and asked how Ravel had escaped. Ravel replied that someone had rescued her in the forest, appearing just when she needed help like in the stories, and that she wanted to introduce him. She turned expecting Haruka to be right behind her, but he was gone. Ravel stepped outside with her family following, all baffled. Her second brother suggested that she might have imagined the rescue, while Ravel expressed a sincere desire to meet the person who had saved their sister. Frustrated, Ravel stamped her foot and insisted that the savior had been real. Her mother thanked the unknown rescuer for returning her only daughter and kissed the top of Ravel's head. On a nearby rooftop a boy watched the reunion. He watched the family flare into protective anger at the thought of harm, vow fierce retribution, then relax into laughter and relief as they reunited. He watched Ravel's father cry at seeing his daughter safe and watched them comfort one another. Deep inside, the boy who would one day become Issei Hyoudou wondered if this was what it felt like to have a family. Present day. Issei sighed, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed, and explained that that was the story of how he had met Ravel. He had edited much of what he told them, but the essentials were there. A hushed silence followed his retelling. Everyone was surprised by the story, even Ravel, who had been there. Only one person broke the silence. A tall man who spoke from behind Issei and identified him as the one who had rescued his daughter. Issei nearly jumped and slammed his toe on a bedpost. Cursing under his breath, he hopped and clutched his foot as he faced the speaker. The man was taller than Issei, dressed in a white dress shirt, a tailored black jacket, and straight black pants. He had the blonde hair common to the Phoenix family and rugged features. Issei could see resemblances to both Ravel and Reiser. The man inspected him, nodded, and observed that Issei must be the person Ravel had been talking about for years. Ravel blushed and addressed the man as her father. A family member teased that Ravel had been talking about Haruka the previous year and suggested she might have had a crush, which made Ravel react with an embarrassed wail. Everyone in the room looked on, visibly awkward. The man shifted to a more solemn tone and thanked Issei for saving his daughter when no one else had. He said Issei had brought her back without expecting reward or recognition and offered his eternal gratitude. The man was Lord Rayleigh Phoenix, one of the 34 remaining heads of houses in the underworld, and he bowed to a slack-jawed Issei. Ravel tentatively addressed him as father again, still uncertain. Issei noticed she had been doing that a lot, then found his words. He explained that he did not care about rewards. When he heard her cry, he had helped because she had seemed helpless, scared, and alone. He asked what kind of man would have done otherwise. Rayleigh rose and met Issei's gaze. He told Issei that he was a good man and confirmed his name as Issei Hyoudou. Surzex laughed and teased Rayleigh for seeming to like Issei, which made Issei jump and accidentally hit his other toe. He muttered a curse as Surzex chuckled at his discomfort. Rayleigh said that he did like Issei, calling him honest and caring and noting his strength, since he had apparently defeated Reiser. Then, abruptly, Rayleigh asked Issei how he felt about marrying Ravel. Issei fell forward in surprise. The room erupted in exclamations. Rias protested that such a thing could not be done and then covered her mouth when she realized whom she had been speaking to. Others reacted in a mix of scandalized cries, confused expressions, warm congratulations, and teasing admonitions about moving too quickly. Ravel, flustered, admitted that marriage to him felt sudden and that it was moving too fast for her. She said she was not ready and mentioned that she still belonged to her brother's peerage, but she trailed off uncertainly. Rayleigh looked at Issei with expectation. Issei stammered that he was unsure it was wise, pointing out that Ravel's brother had just had an arranged marriage disrupted and it might be in poor taste to ask Ravel into one immediately afterward. Rayleigh smiled knowingly and made it clear that Issei's hesitation was not a refusal. Issei coughed and tried to find words, fumbling that Ravel was a very beautiful woman and then failing to elaborate. Rayleigh patted him on the shoulder, then left the room with Ravel and Maihi. Issei turned to Surzex, who wore a smug grin, and then to his king. Rias asked if this was what he had meant when he said he had met other devils before, and Issei awkwardly admitted that it was. Rias nodded, crossing her arms. Surzex commented that it was surprising to learn how well-connected Issei had become. Issei demurred that he had simply helped someone in need and asked if that was really a big deal, receiving only a chuckle in response. Issei felt that the matter was not yet finished. Issei thought to himself that he had been right. Rias bowed low and explained her family's situation to Issei's parents, asking permission to stay in the Hyoudou house with Issei. Issei sat on the living room couch beside his parents, and everyone stared at the scene. Asia, nearby, offered a small encouraging gesture. A stack of luggage sat in the corner. Issei's father welcomed Rias warmly and said their home would gladly take her in, remarking with a laugh that Issei had already brought 2 young women into the house, Asia and Rias. Issei's mother smiled and said she would have 2 daughters now. Issei's father placed a hand on Issei's shoulder, solemn but teasingly hopeful about Issei's future and the life he might build. Issei felt a rush of emotion and, grasping his father's hand, promised to try his best to make him proud. Rias then said she had received permission from his parents to stay and asked Issei to help with her bags. Issei agreed and began moving luggage. Rias mentioned she would like to freshen up afterward, and Asia protested briefly about being left out before everyone laughed and settled into the house. Issei marveled inwardly at how lively his life had become. Drake chuckled in Issei's mind and confirmed that things were indeed becoming more interesting. Some time earlier, a desperate old man had begged a young stranger to climb to the temple on top of a cliff and retrieve a treasure. The plea had been so raw and earnest that the boy could not refuse. Standing at the gate to the temple, the boy was confronted by a sphinx that spoke in perfect Japanese, asking if he was prepared to answer its questions and warning that failure would have grave consequences. The sphinx circled him like a predator, but the boy could not help admiring its beauty. It was large, its golden-brown fur gleaming, eagle wings folded close to its body. Its face was androgynous and its gray eyes held an air of deep wisdom as they focused on him. The boy told the Sphinx that he was prepared to answer its questions so he could continue to the temple and help the old man. The Sphinx nodded and, as if preparing itself, closed its eyes for a moment. A podium with paper and a pencil then materialized between them. Suddenly the Sphinx adopted a theatrical game show persona, appearing as if dressed in a suit and hat and taking up a microphone. Recorded applause and cheering played from hidden speakers as the Sphinx announced the challenge in an exaggerated voice, promising that the challenger could advance if they passed and would suffer a dramatic elimination if they failed. Unnerved but determined, the boy sat at the desk and picked up a pencil. A drum roll sounded from the speakers, and he noticed the paper had multiple choice boxes to fill in. The Sphinx presented the first question, asking when World War I had ended. The boy, surprised by the unexpected test, answered November 11, 1918, and applause echoed around him. The Sphinx reminded him to mark his answers on the paper and then moved on to the next question, asking for the capital of Ireland. When the boy began to speak up, he interrupted, asking about the classic riddle of what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening. The Sphinx raised an elegant eyebrow at the reference while the boy recited the riddle about a man's stages of life. The boy remarked that it was the riddle Sphinxes used to ask. The Sphinx explained that yes, but most people already knew the answer now, so the Sphinxes had agreed to change the questions to fit the times. The boy asked for clarification about who had agreed. The Sphinx gestured impatiently and said that it was a collective decision by the Association of Sphinxes in Secrecy, intended to make the riddles harder for heroes. Unsure but willing, The boy picked up his pencil and began to answer. The Sphinx asked questions and the boy provided the correct answers. After 10 minutes and 20 questions, the Sphinx checked his work. The Sphinx noted that the answers were nicely filled in and used its front paws to take the paper from the machine. When the machine announced that everything was correct, pre-recorded applause filled the empty planes. The Sphinx, still dressed in the host outfit, beamed and moved to allow the boy to continue. The boy hesitated and then walked forward slowly. Normally he would have expected an ambush at that point, but to his relief, no attack came. After 5 minutes of travel, the boy finally found the temple the old man had spoken of. It looked like a standard Greek temple, which made sense on an island a little off the mainland coast, with pillars guarding its entrance. Inside, the steps rose toward the center, where a single platform held something under a glass dome. By then the boy was on edge, expecting an ambush. He was surprised that no monster leapt at him, no cultists waited to sacrifice him, and no traps sprang as he approached the waist-high podium. On the pedestal lay a single dagger under the dome. The dagger was strange. Its surface shimmered with shifting colors, and the blade twisted in an unusual double curve before straightening toward the tip. Greek inscriptions marked the junction of blade and handle. The guard was elegant, filigreed with red and gold. Despite its ornate look, the edge and tip appeared blunt and the material seemed brittle. Still, the boy felt a deep sense of wrong about it, as if the thing was steeped in betrayal. Because he had come for it, he reached out and grasped the handle. Almost immediately, the roars of monsters began to rise as the enchantment that bound them broke. The boy swore that he had known it was too much to expect nothing to happen. He summoned a gauntlet on his left arm and drew a knife from his waist with his right hand. Trapdoors in the floor popped open and creatures poured into the room. Many appeared as female figures with unsettling mismatches, bronze limbs, animal feet that made them strange rather than alluring. There were also satyrs armed with knives, hellhounds, and a minotaur wielding a huge battle-axe. A bead of sweat tracked down the boy's cheek as the courtyard filled, every monster focused on him. The tension held only until the minotaur, impatient, roared and charged. That charge was the signal. The entire mob surged forward. The minotaur reached him first. The boy dodged as the axe struck the ground and became lodged. He used the haft as a springboard, ran up the tall beast, and delivered a precise strike. In a burst of golden sand the creature dissolved, leaving behind a single curved horn. One down, many more to go, he thought, and charged into the crowd, cutting through them with swift, decisive moves rendered almost like a choreographed scene from an anime. The battle was swift and stylized. No gore remained, only collapsing forms and scattering dust. Hours later, the boy stood alone in the temple. The floor was an inch deep in dust. He pocketed the dagger and headed for the exit, then tripped over something on the way out. It was the Minotaur's horn. He picked it up, noted its wicked curve and surprising length, nearly 12 inches from base to tip, and after a moment, pocketed it before returning to the old man. He found the old man sitting against the lone tree on the cliff, looking out over the ocean. The old man looked up at the approaching boy with awe and relief, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. He told the boy that he had come back and that he could not believe it. The boy answered simply that he had. The old man asked why the boy had done it, genuine confusion in his voice as if he had not expected anyone to answer his plea. The boy replied that there was no reason not to. The old man fell silent, then began to tell his story through tears. He had once been a sage, respected by those who knew the supernatural. Then tragedy struck. His wife and 3 children had been murdered by a mage who used their deaths to fuel dark rituals. Enraged, the sage had stormed the mage's workshop and challenged the man to a duel. After 7 days and nights he had been defeated and only survived because a last-minute barrier allowed him to escape. Shamed and unable to avenge his family, the sage turned to rumors of a powerful artifact. He spent months tracking down what he hoped would give him the means to act. What he found was more than an artifact. He found a jinn. Jinn were among the most potent beings in the mortal realm, creatures of smoke and fire capable of granting contractors their desires. They did not give freely, they always exacted a price and offered only the bare minimum in return. Drunk on anger and the euphoria of finding such power, the sage made a contract with the jinn and asked for the strength to kill the mage. The jinn granted his wish. Elated, the sage returned to his land and smashed through the mage's barriers. Whatever the terrified mage sent against him, the sage brushed aside with contempt. He killed the mage to make him pay for the suffering he had caused. When the task was finished and the contract was satisfied, the jinn appeared before the man. The jinn reached into him and stripped away the gifts he had been given, taking not only the power granted by their pact but the strength he had possessed before the agreement. Before the helpless man's eyes, the jinn walked to the fallen forms of his family. With a swift, shadowed motion, the jinn drew their life essences away like pale threads of light, gathering them into a fist of smoke. The family cried out and the old man begged for mercy. The jinn told the old man that, having entered the contract, he had done his part and now the man must do his. The man could do nothing as the jinn closed his fist and the light that had been his loved one's was swallowed by smoke and vanished. The old man begged and pleaded, but the jinn remained resolute and refused to release them. He spent the rest of his days wandering, searching for the jinn he had unwittingly unleashed and for a way to undo the harm done to his land. Now weakened and powerless, he found the boy and implored him to help reclaim not only his family but the land itself. He explained the dagger he carried, the powers bound to it, and finally told the boy the dagger's name. Its name was Motohana whispered Sakura's name to the two people beside him. Issei and Matsuda listened from the cramped space they had wedged themselves into near the first-year girls' changing room. The three of them were squeezed together, heartbeats loud in the small darkness, riding the thrill of a foolish plan that had seemed worth any risk. Issei thought back to how he had ended up in that locker. He had been walking back to his room with Asia at his side, and Rias had been with them earlier that day. When the three of them had passed through the school gates, a crowd had reacted angrily, shouting indignantly at Issei and directing insults and threats his way. Issei had sighed and stepped inside his dormitory. Suddenly a quick, theatrical kick struck him, and he doubled over as if in a cartoonish reaction. He crumpled to the floor and dropped his bag. Asia called out in concern and moved to check on him, asking if he was hurt and whether she should do anything. Matsuda glared down at Issei with a haunted expression. Motohana, eyes burning, accused Issei of putting them in an awkward position. Issei remembered he had arranged a meeting between their friends and another group, and that the meeting had gone poorly. The others described the guests as rough and intimidating, and Issei felt guilty. Matsuda pretended to be upset at first but then smirked. He and Motohana hinted that they had another plan in mind to get their own amusement from the situation. Issei grew wary and asked what they meant, but Matsuda waved it off as nothing important. Motohana said they had something that would be unforgettable. Issei begged to be included, offering anything to join, and his friends exchanged satisfied looks. Asia remained concerned for Issei's well-being. Later, cramped together in the locker, the three young men tried to watch what was happening beyond the door, their nerves stretched between curiosity and guilt. Issei's attempts to make light of the situation and point out classmates inside made his friends noisily respond, Matsuda jeering, Motohana egging him on, but none of their comments went into detail. More students were coming into the changing room to get ready for physical education, and one of the first-year students with white hair and hazel eyes entered, drawing attention. As she caught sight of someone near the door, she narrowed her eyes and gave Issei a look that made him freeze. He relaxed when she looked away, then braced himself as something from inside the room struck the metal door. A compact, powerful blow ripped through the locker door and sent it crashing off its hinges. The three boys were abruptly exposed and the impact left Matsuda and Motohana unconscious from the shock. Issei's face went ashen as he realized how badly their scheme had backfired. Issei tried to deflect with a clumsy joke asking whether they came here often, but his attempt at humor fell flat. The girls were not amused, and the scene ended with the students around them furious and the boys facing the consequences of their poor choices. Rule breaker. Issei raised his arm above his head as he stared at the object he held. After a rather disastrous attempt to peek earlier, he had come to the school rooftop to think about what this relic meant for him and for his life as a devil. Rule breaker was, simply put, the best anti-magic weapon in the world. Almost every kind of magic, except for a few exceptions, and the truly powerful was nullified by its blade. Spells would be cut, runes extinguished, and in most cases even contracts could be severed. It had even worked through a ritual on souls bound by a djinn and managed to dissolve them. He considered the implications. The dragon inside him admitted that he had forgotten about that detail. Issei raised an eyebrow at the dragon and asked if that was true. The dragon explained that when a host's life was as hectic as Issei's, things tended to be forgotten. They shared a quiet chuckle before the dragon, growing more serious, asked whether Issei intended to use the blade on himself. Issei admitted he did not really know. The dragon noted that Issei was the sort to plan most things he did. Issei smiled and reminded the creature that he would not be alive if he did not plan. The dragon agreed. After a pause, Issei sheathed Rule Breaker, hid it in a pouch, and reminded himself that he still needed to go to class. After school, Issei had spoken with Asia back in the classroom. Concerned about his surrogate little sister's performance, he asked how she was doing in her classes. Asia brightened and said that many classmates were willing to help her improve and that they wanted her to go to the mall later. Issei felt relief. He had never been very studious himself, and he was glad she had support. Asia fidgeted and asked if she should go with them. Issei encouraged her, saying that high school was the springtime of youth and that she should go enjoy herself, especially since the club president and Akino were not present that day. He offered to take care of Asia's contracts while she was out. She hesitated briefly, then he gently steered her toward the group of girls waiting for her. Blushing, Asia ran off to join Hyoudou Issei, a bespectacled girl with brown hair in 2 braids. With a final wave, Issei headed to the clubroom. When he entered the clubroom, he found only Kaneko, quietly eating sweets. Issei greeted her. Her glare made it clear she had not forgotten what he had done earlier and had not forgiven him. Kaneko tersely told him that Kiba was out with his friends. An awkward silence stretched between them. Kaneko broke the silence by thanking Issei for his lessons. Issei was surprised by the show of appreciation and responded that he was happy to help his junior. He teased that it was nothing unusual for a senior to help a junior, which caused a rare flush of embarrassment on the normally reserved girl. Gaining her resolve, Kaneko asked to be taught how to fight like him. She explained that during the match she had felt she had not helped much and that Issei, Kiba, Akino, the club president, and even Asia had all seemed better than her. Her fists clenched and she looked down. Issei's expression softened. He reminded her that she had been an important part of the club president's plan and had performed well, even managing to eliminate many of Riser's pieces, so she should not think so poorly of herself. Surprised, Kaneko looked up wide-eyed. Issei reached out and patted her on the head. He agreed to teach her, saying that it was a senior's duty to help juniors. Kaneko nodded. Issei found himself in a predicament. He had told Kaneko he would help her with senjutsu, but he was not an expert. When he called himself a beginner in senjutsu, he had not been lying. He only knew the bare basics of chakra application. Still, he had promised to help, and he intended to keep that promise. His own fighting style had been learned in hundreds of life-and-death encounters, forcing him to move on instinct more than by textbook. It relied on quick adaptation and ruthless pragmatism. Kaneko arrived at the meeting place on time and asked from behind why they needed to train where they were. Issei explained that fighting practice required space and that the forest outside Kuo Town offered a wide clearing and kept their use of magic hidden from unaware humans. At the mention of what he planned to do, Kaneko hugged her arms to her chest and glared, asking what he intended. Issei quickly corrected himself and clarified that he meant they would likely use magic and it would be better if humans did not notice. Kaneko relaxed slightly and asked what they were going to do. Issei asked her to try to meditate while he thought, and she obliged, sitting cross-legged and closing her eyes to regulate her internal energy. Issei sat at the edge of the clearing with his back against a tree and tried to decide what to teach her. His mind flashed to a martial arts style he had once seen in Vietnam, a pragmatic system that emphasized footwork and using an opponent's momentum against them. It mixed grappling and opportunistic strikes with efficient movement. He decided that teaching that kind of footwork would suit Kaneko's small frame by turning mobility into an advantage. First, though, she needed to learn the basics of foot movement. Issei called Kaneko over, and the Nikomata opened her eyes and followed. Confusion changed quickly to surprise when Issei's right hand moved behind her waist and his left took her right hand in a standard dancing hold. Kaneko addressed him uncertainly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Issei reminded her that she had asked to be taught and explained that his own style did not fit her build. He intended to teach the technique he had seen, starting with complicated footwork, and that the dancing position would help. Kaneko asked why dancing, still blushing, and Issei reiterated that the steps would train her feet to move properly. Without waiting for a verbal answer, Issei led a step and a hum, guiding the movement and prompting Kaneko to follow. She hesitated at first, then warmed to the tempo. Her steps became surer and lighter as she matched the rhythm and learned to move in relation to an imagined opponent. They practiced in the clearing with no one else present, moving as if to a tune only they could hear. Gradually Issei slowed the pattern until they came to a complete stop where they had begun. Kaneko tried to hide her disappointment when the movement ended. Issei stepped away to give her space and instructed her to repeat the steps on her own, stressing that she should put her strength into the motion and practice until it became instinctive. Kaneko checked her wrist and was surprised to find that an hour and a half had already passed. She shook her head, rose, and began the steps alone. Issei watched with a satisfied smile as she moved through the form with growing confidence. Her arms and feet described patterns of defense and attack as if she were dancing around invisible opponents. She twirled and simulated a kick, embodying the timing and balance Issei had emphasized. At one point she spun and reached out, catching Issei's arm a hair's breadth from her face, her right hand holding his fist and her left gripping his bicep. Issei gently freed his arm from her grip and praised her performance, telling her she had done well. Kaneko returned a soft thank you. Issei reminded her that it was his duty as her senior to help her reach her potential, and he encouraged more practice until the steps were second nature. When Kaneko asked meekly if he would teach her again, Issei agreed, a little flustered by her quiet earnestness. Her smile afterward was bright and contagious. Issei grinned happily, clutching the bag close to his chest as he walked back to his house. The latest volume of his favorite manga had just come out 3 days ago, and he was finally bringing home a copy. He had been distracted earlier and only now had the chance to enjoy a quiet day at home. His parents had gone to Hokkaido to visit an ill relative, Aisha had gone out with friends, and Rias had returned to the underworld to handle family matters. It seemed like the perfect day, and nothing could possibly ruin it. A massive spike of aura laced with malice, however, rose from the forest and cut through his thoughts. Issei recognized the signature immediately. When the energy abruptly vanished from his senses, fear tightened his chest. There were only 2 reasons for an aura to drop that suddenly, and neither was good. Issei shouted Kaneko's name, dropped the bag with the manga, summoned his gauntlets, and ran toward the clearing. Kaneko was deeply confused. She had often thought of her senpai as a pervert at first, and that impression had been reinforced by some of his behavior. But she also knew him to be dependable and kind, someone who offered comfort when needed. She had come to the clearing for her regular meditation and used the quiet time to reflect. As she drifted, her regulation of energy built up without her noticing. The flow that usually calmed her began to strain her core. Her breath shortened, her limbs twitched, and alarm prickled at the edges of her awareness. Realization hit her too late. An intrusive malice of chakra was overwhelming her, and she began a desperate, losing struggle against it. Her thoughts turned to her senpai even as a veil of influence dulled her senses. Issei burst through the trees into the clearing just as the aura faded away. He saw Kaneko crouched in the center, tails and cat ears visible. He called her name warily and stepped closer before placing a hand on her shoulder. The moment his hand touched her, her face snapped toward him. Her irises had darkened with a red rim, and strange dark streaks traced down from her eyes. In a blur of motion, her fist slammed toward Issei. He crossed his arms just in time to block, but the impact sent him flying backward into a tree trunk, slamming him against it hard enough to leave an impression of his silhouette on the bark. Issei pushed himself up, brushing off dust, noting the raw force of nature chakra. He recognized how potent it was. Kaneko closed the distance in an instant, her gaze still strange, and kicked him, sending him skidding to the far side of the clearing. He used the momentum to plant his feet against a tree and turn, watching Kaneko low to the ground and circling like a hunter. He mouthed to himself that he had underestimated the danger. His shoulder throbbed from a heavy blow, and he rotated it carefully, trying not to make the injury worse. Inside him, the spirit drake offered a dry comparison to the mighty opponents Issei had faced before and tried to calm his host. Issei reminded himself that he did not want to hurt Kaneko and that he needed to subdue her without causing lasting damage. Drake admitted that this would complicate things and then warned Issei to watch out. Issei sidestepped as Kaneko lunged with claws bared. He grabbed her outstretched hands and put her in a lock, hoping to buy time to think. She forced her way free with surprising strength and turned back toward him, raising a fist crackling with a yellow aura. Issei recognized the energy instantly and cursed under his breath. Pain exploded through him. Kaneko's mind, muddled by the corrupting malice in the air, registered that the only other person in the clearing had been thrown into the trees by her. The trunks splintered under the force of the impact. She grinned fiercely and stalked over, following the shallow furrows left by a dragged body as she edged closer to see what had become of him. A low groan made her pause. She was astonished to find he was still alive. He rose slowly from the ruined tangle of wood and dirt, dusting himself off and showing the signs of a hard fight. Issei told Kaneko that at any other time he would have been proud of her and that she had improved a lot from the girl he had taught just weeks before. He admitted, with a rueful expression, that he was disappointed she had yielded to the malign influence on her chakra. Kaneko snarled at him, enraged by the implication that she was weak. She had never felt stronger, and she intended to prove it. She unsheathed her claws with the silent, predatory grace of a hunter. Issei said that, as her senior, it was his responsibility to make sure she reached her full potential, and he accused her of being a faker who only copied Kaneko-chan, insisting she would never truly be the person he had known. The remark made her falter for a moment. She clenched her teeth and glared up at him. He stood calmly, resolute and determined. Issei vowed that he would bring back the Kaneko he remembered. In response, Kaneko threw herself forward, surrendering to the feral instinct that drove her fight. She struck Issei, and he raised an arm to block. She pulled back and attacked in earnest. Her assaults were fierce and relentless, each strike intended to overwhelm and subdue rather than linger on cruelty. In the heat of combat, a new clarity began to surface within her ancient instincts and buried reactions making themselves known. Issei unleashed a burst of flame from his hands, which Kaneko avoided with a swift leap. Chakra gathered in her palm, coalescing into a spinning, condensed orb that rasped the air with its speed. She launched herself at him, the whirling sphere aimed at his chest. She watched his eyes widen as he stumbled back, trying to create space. Kaneko pushed harder, her powerful legs driving her forward, and the orb slammed into him. Issei was hurled backward by the impact, sliding along the ground and gouging furrows before coming to rest at the base of a battered tree, a cloud of dust rising to partially obscure him. Kaneko dropped her arms and panted, breathing heavy from the exertion. Issei stood again despite the blow and, with an odd mixture of gravity and warmth, told her he was proud of what she had done. His black jacket lay torn, its hood gone. Even in the throes of her corrupted sage mode, and even though he stood as her opponent, Kaneko felt a strange rush of happiness at his praise. Issei then shifted his stance and said this was the point where he would go all out. He planted his feet, tapping rhythmically at the ground and warning her not to blink. The casual rhythm unsettled Kaneko, and she furrowed her brow as she sensed something off about him. The tapping quickened until the movement and sound no longer matched. He suddenly appeared almost on top of her, footprints momentarily marking the ground where he had been. Before she could react, Issei grabbed the front of her shirt and slammed her down. He stood over her with an apologetic expression and explained that what he intended to do was for her own good. He said that the amount of energy she had been holding was too much for a body to contain and that he would draw that chakra out using his own and release it safely into the air. He reached down, fingers poised near her forehead. Kaniko's instincts screamed danger. She fought to keep his hand away from her head, muscles straining against his grip. Then, following an internal cue, she made herself go still. Her body relaxed and her eyelids closed. Issei interpreted the motion as surrender and began the process he had described, working as gently as he could. Suddenly Kaniko's eyes snapped open. They were completely black, a stark contrast against her pale face, and the energy around her flared with a powerful roar. Issei jumped back instinctively, putting distance between himself and the unstable, crackling surge of energy that hung in the air. Drake warned that things were getting out of hand, and Issei acknowledged that inwardly. He could not let this aura leak into the real world. The consequences for Kuo Town would be catastrophic, rendering the area uninhabitable. He grunted, then swept his arms down to disperse the dust. The movement revealed Kaniko's changed form. Her eyes were black and empty, locking onto him with an unnerving intensity. Her skin had lost color, pale to the point of being sickly, and the markings on her face had shifted into sharp symbols on her cheeks and a crest on her forehead. She wore a short red kimono under a longer tan coat, a large red ribbon obscuring much of the front of her outfit. Kaniko stood silently, studying her new appearance. Issei called Kaniko's name cautiously and asked if she was all right. Kaniko turned slowly, those hollow eyes fixed on him, and a beatific smile spread across her face. She told him that she was fine, but Issei felt that the words did not match what he saw. Drake remarked internally that the answer was obvious, but Issei told him it was not the time to argue. Kaniko raised an arm. Light coalesced in her palm and extended into claw-like energy along her forearms. Issei thought bitterly that life would never be easy as he watched the smile linger on her face. Issei tried to speak again, but Kaniko vanished and reappeared immediately in front of him, claws raised. He grabbed her by the arms by reflex and felt the vibration of power under the metal of his gauntlets, confirming how dangerous whatever she had become was. She vaulted, bringing a knee wrapped in a yellow aura toward his face. Issei cursed and ducked, forced to let go. Kaniko spun, using the kick's momentum to swing a forearm aimed at his throat. Issei retreated, the blow grazing the air inches from his nose. He considered how to handle the situation. The negative energy coursing through her was unstable and would only worsen if he delayed. Issei asked Kaniko to listen and tried to reason with her, warning that the energy might help her now but would escalate and could destroy her. He urged her to think of their friends, the club president, Akino, Kiba, and Asia, and how much they would miss her. He watched emotions pass over her face, then the same unsettling smile returned. Kaniko insisted that she would not let anything stop her. She claimed to be strong enough. Issei did not expect reasoning to work, but he held his ground. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt a steady thrum of power strengthen his body. He steeled his resolve and prepared to act. He moved, appearing directly in front of the surprised Nikomata. She swung her claws to buy time. Issei batted them aside. Kaniko kicked the ground and launched herself backward, and Issei pursued without letting up. Kaniko's back struck a tree she had forgotten in her flight. She froze when she saw a hand wreathed in orange flames come toward her midsection, the strike radiating a threatening force. She rolled aside at the last moment, narrowly avoiding the blow, and saw a faint scorch where Issei's fist had struck. Issei apologized to Kaniko and explained that he was acting for her own good, asking her to bear with him even if it hurt. The gentleness in his voice eased her tension unconsciously. Seizing the moment, Issei extended his hand toward her, hoping to end the confrontation. Kaniko, caught off guard, closed her eyes and reached out, catching his hand. Instead of absorbing the energy within her, Issei's flames sputtered and vanished where their hands met. He stood stunned, momentarily numb with surprise. Kaniko then gave a grin. Kaniko closed her much smaller hands around his and pulled him toward her. Issei stumbled forward as a knee rose toward his face. The force of the kick imbued with nature energy and the raw strength of a yokai sent his body skidding into the treeline once again. Kaniko exhaled sharply, keeping her guard up as she cautiously moved to where he had landed. She had nearly lost because of carelessness before and refused to let that happen again. She stalked forward with her claws still unsheathed, waiting for the moment Issei would press his attack. Reaching the third trench carved into the clearing by his impact, her senses sharpened to their fullest, eyes focused and ears alert. She would not be caught unprepared this time. She believed she was ready to face him after seeing his strength in the fight. She was reasonably annoyed when frost suddenly erupted outward, obscuring her vision and turning the clearing into a world of ice. Drake asked why Issei had not done this sooner. Issei admitted that he had actually forgotten he could, and he picked himself off the ground for the umpteenth time that day, dusting dirt off his clothes and freeing his feet from the tangle of earth, stone, and splintered wood left by their repeated clashes. Drake sounded amused and reminded him to move quickly, warning that the girl looked close to the final stages of her transformation. Issei grimaced at his own earlier incompetence and decided there would be no second chance. He released the first of the seals on his gauntlets, the numeral 3 disappearing, and prepared to get serious. He approached Kaneko, who had fallen and was now on the ground, eyes dark and showing a mixture of wonder and irritation. Issei sighed, thinking he could never manage a week without something going wrong. Kaneko shuffled backward, putting distance between them. A breeze picked up, lifting dust and fragments of ice into the air. Issei thought the moment felt almost cliched. Kaneko's face had settled into an indifferent expression, a stark contrast to the unnerving grins she had worn earlier. Issei asked if she was ready, but silence answered him. A single leaf drifted down and landed gently on the ground. With Drake's command to boost, Issei and Kaneko flashed toward one another. Their fists met in a thunderous clash that bent some of the trees surrounding the clearing. Issei raised his gauntlets and Kaneko her claws, and they traded strike after strike, blows strong enough to crack stone. Issei reflected on the sheer power of Yukai. Their bodies were unnaturally resilient, and their innate affinity with nature chakra made them formidable opponents. He narrowly avoided a clawed strike that could have seriously injured him and drove his flame-covered hands toward Kaneko's arm, managing to make contact. This time, some of Kaneko's energy dissipated, cleansed by his fire and fading into the air. Kaneko retaliated, landing a glancing hit on his right shoulder before pushing off the ground to create distance. The wound on his shoulder bled and stained his clothing, one of the first injuries he had taken in years. Drake urged him to boost again, and Issei responded, shifting to the offensive as his flames burned a brighter orange, radiating a dangerous yet strangely comforting warmth. The battle turned into a frantic game of chase, with Issei pressing and Kaneko slipping away. Issei noticed her movements losing their earlier grace. The cold was sapping her strength, even if her Yukai and devil physiology let her resist the drop in temperature better than most. She was tiring. A moment of chance arrived when Kaneko landed on unstable ground and stumbled. Issei seized the opportunity and managed to make contact with her chakra. He used that contact to infuse some of his custom magic circles, drawing on the connection he had forced. He focused that link and, with a deliberate motion, disrupted the protective magic she had been using. Issei apologized to Kaneko and activated the technique to break her defensive magic, causing her defenses to fail and leaving her surprised. Kaneko recoiled in shock, and the confrontation shifted. Issei felt a surge of pride in the technique he had developed through persistence. It was a personal achievement and a testament to his growth as a magician. Kaneko's response was immediate and fierce. Her aura bore down on him with full force, and Issei realized he had pushed her further than he intended. She glared at him, eyes bright with fury and on the verge of tears, and he found himself backing away, wishing he had chosen a different tactic. Maybe he shouldn't have done that. In his fear of female retribution, Issei did not notice that her eyes had returned to their normal state, hazel irises set against a regular white, showing that the chakra had stopped circulating through her body. She demanded that he take responsibility. Her aura, if that was even possible, rose to even greater heights and became a beacon of light. Issei's eyes widened as he finally saw what was happening to Kaneko. He realized he could use this to his advantage and end it once and for all. He ran toward Kaneko, eyes narrowed in concentration. The Nikomata stepped back, fear in her eyes. She raised her aura to its fullest, trying hard to force Issei away. A surge of panicked thoughts crossed her mind, but she pushed them aside and focused on escape. She was a little too slow to react. Issei grabbed her wrists, and the palms of his hands flared with controlled fire, a spectacle of light rather than a weapon. Kaniko's aura met his, and their energies collided in a dazzling, non-graphic burst, sending them spinning apart. Issei began to sweat as he tried to purify the energy inside his junior. The flames fought against the malice of the technique, proving far stronger than he had expected. This amount of energy could not belong to a mere cat spirit, no matter how talented she might be. The truth was worse. Issei's eyes widened as the opposing energy suddenly doubled its efforts, refusing to be quelled. He felt another surge of power hammer into him. He forced himself to stand his ground, pushing back against that wall of energy while long since losing his grip on Kaniko's wrist. He ground his teeth as the pressure slowly but surely pushed him backward. He considered using his balance breaker before deciding it would be overkill. He was trying to save his junior, not recreate the effects of a massive detonation. Besides, the amount of energy released during a Longinus transformation could destroy an entire town if mishandled. He would not risk that if he could handle the situation himself. A sudden burst of flame roared to life, engulfing the pillar of light in its glow. Issei watched the fire devour the malice and purify it before the two energies thinned and dissipated into the air. Even so, it was not enough. He might be powerful, but the amount of energy Kaniko had accumulated was unbelievable. She was more than a cat spirit, she was far stronger. Issei snarled as his flames began to falter, the fire taking on a sickly green tinge. He could not generate more. The energy still emanating from Kaniko would, if absorbed, rush to his core and destroy him from within. His flames sputtered out and faded into sparks, leaving him exhausted and unable to continue. When the light cleared, he could see Kaniko. She lay face down on the ground, unconscious and utterly spent. Made it clear that she had finally run out of chakra. Issei could have ignored the lingering malicious energy and stepped away, letting it find other hosts. The easiest targets would have been the humans nearby. He refused that course. He activated his 0-point breakthrough. The backlash of energy shoved him until his back struck the trees, the force driving him so hard he left an indentation in the bark. Slowly, the push of chakra began to find other places to funnel places inside his own body. If he could force Drag to regulate the malice within him, the curse might be purified and safely released back into nature without harming others. In theory it could work. Issei gritted his teeth and fought to control the onslaught. Drag answered in kind, forcing Issei's body to adapt to the sudden influx. His arms trembled and simply keeping his eyes open became an effort, but he persevered. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the flow finally stopped. Issei stumbled away from the tree dent he had made and nearly fell to his knees. His legs trembled with weakness. Drag's voice, sharp with shock, demanded what he had done, furious that Issei had taken on a curse that affected his life force. Issei told his partner that he had done the only thing he could. It was better than letting his body rupture from within. Drag, still angry and unsettled, fell silent for the moment. Issei pushed himself to his feet and moved toward Kaniko. He leaned down and gently shook her. He urged her to wake, speaking softly. Kaniko stirred, blinking blearily as she came back to awareness and addressed him hesitantly as her senior. She asked what had happened, then suddenly sat up straight, fear and remorse written across her face. She crawled backward until she hit a tree and clutched at her head, muttering to herself in panic. Issei stayed close and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He asked quietly what was wrong, careful to keep his voice calm so she would not panic further. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes, apologizing repeatedly for what had happened, and then suddenly wrapped her arms around him in a desperate embrace. Issei patted her head and stroked her back until she gradually relaxed, curling slightly against him. With a motion of his hand, he dispelled the ice that had covered the clearing, restoring the area as if nothing had happened. He waited until she calmed, giving her a few minutes to compose herself, then shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. After a pause, Issei asked gently whether she truly was not a cat spirit. Kaneko stiffened and drew the jacket closer, then nodded hesitantly. Issei spoke slowly, stating that she was a cat sovereign. A cat sovereign was arguably one of the most formidable types of yukai. Exceptional physical strength, unmatched senjutsu, and powerful yujitsu. Some of the strongest among them could challenge a god to a standstill. Issei had just absorbed a surge of energy from one of those beings using only the barest measure of his own abilities. He was lucky the battle had ended on a light note, with no deaths or things blowing up. His choice not to use Balance Breaker had proved wise. His suspicion that she really was a yukai was finally confirmed when Kaneko nodded again, pulling the jacket even closer and hiding her head beneath the collar. Issei sat down beside Kaneko and asked why she had tried to hide it. Kaneko admitted she had been scared and tugged at the frayed sleeve of the jacket. Issei, genuinely curious, wondered why a being as powerful as her would hold herself back from reaching her full strength. Kaneko hesitated, her eyes flashing with many emotions, then she explained. Her sister had been the best person she knew, kind, dependable, always there for her. One day they had been taken in by a devil and her sister made into his bishop. Then the sisters suddenly attacked and their master was struck down, an act that shocked the underworld. The authorities searched for her sister but could not find her, and suspicion fell on Kaneko as the supposed cause. They were ready to punish her, but someone intervened. It was Bucho's brother, Maosama, who freed her and entrusted her to his little sister for care. Kaneko later learned that her sister had absorbed too much natural chakra and lost control, and that was why she had attacked the master. Kaneko hugged her knees and rested her chin on them as Issei remained silent, thinking about what he had just learned. He realized why she had been so reluctant at the training camp. She had feared becoming like her sister, losing herself to power. Before he could think, Issei told Kaneko not to worry and promised he would be there for her if she ever lost control. Kaneko's eyes widened at his words, and she asked if he really meant it while raising her right arm with her pinky extended. Issei took her pinky and returned the promise, and Kaneko, seeing the conviction in his eyes, believed him. Issei carried Kaneko on his back toward her apartment, her arms wrapped around his neck. He had tried to persuade her to walk, but she had said her leg hurt. The difference in their heights kept her covered by his jacket, preserving her modesty. Issei asked if this was the right building when they reached a 5-story, upscale-looking complex. Kaneko confirmed into his collar. He entered the code and walked through the door, ignoring a few curious glances because he had someone more important on his back. When the elevator doors opened to the 3rd floor, he followed Kaneko to her room. It was a compact, tidy space that suited her small stature. A desk, a bed with kitten-patterned sheets and pillows, and posters of kittens on the walls. Kaneko gently told him not to look around her room. She seemed embarrassed and a little off-kilter. Issei noticed her hazel eyes were slightly unfocused, still affected by what had happened earlier. She asked him to stay, and he agreed. Stayed up late talking. Rias felt her eye twitch at the sight when she later returned to the house. Akino covered a chuckle behind her hand, amused by their leader's reaction. Kiba sat awkwardly in a chair while Asia sat on the couch, pouting toward Issei. Issei himself looked confused. Kaneko greeted Rias in her usual monotone while nibbling a snack. She sat close to Issei, wearing a black jacket over her school uniform with a jagged collar as if part of it had been torn. Rias, suppressing a question she did not want to ask, moved to her seat at the table. Issei wondered why Rias and Akino had been to the underworld. Akino explained that Rias's family had called her back to handle matters related to an engagement, and Rias had gone to the Phoenix household to sort things out. Rias said her father wanted her to learn political matters by speaking with the Phoenix clan, and she thanked Akino for the support and the cup of tea. Issei then asked about Ravel. Rias replied that Ravel was fine and had inquired about him, asking how he had been. The room settled into a comfortable silence until Akino quietly asked what had happened between Issei and Kaneko. Issei sighed, bracing himself for an awkward explanation.